Hello everyone, and welcome back to Spook Speaks. I know many of you tune in to these videos to help you to sleep, so I thought it would be a fun idea for everyone to share where you're listening from in the world. Feel free to drop a comment below, and if you enjoy the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now get cozy and relaxed. Let's begin. Story 1. It was the first truly warm day of spring when I found it. The kind of day that beckons you outside after a long, cold winter, the sun casting a golden glow on everything. I had been walking through the overgrown field behind my new house, exploring the woods that bordered the property. The house had been abandoned for years before I moved in, and much of the land was wild and untamed. As I pushed through the dense brush, something caught my eye. A small, leather-bound book half buried in the dirt beneath a towering oak tree. Its cover was cracked and weathered, the leather dry and peeling from exposure. But despite its dilapidated state, the pages inside looked strangely well preserved. Curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down and picked it up, brushing the dirt off the cover. There was no title, no name, nothing to indicate what it was or who it belonged to. The only thing that stood out was the faint smell of decay, like old paper that had been left in the damp for far too long. I flipped open the first page, and my heart skipped a beat. Scrawled in looping, delicate handwriting were the words, "Property of Sarah Adams, May 12, 1996. The name sent a shiver down my spine. I remembered reading about Sarah in one of the old newspaper clippings I had found while researching the town. She had gone missing 20 years ago. No one had ever found her body, and the case had gone cold. The town had mourned, but like all tragedies, it eventually faded from memory. I stood there in the middle of the field, the warm breeze suddenly feeling colder. The diary was too pristine to have been sitting there for all these years. How had it stayed intact, and why had no one ever found it before? I knew I should have turned it in to the authorities, but something stopped me. It was like the book had a weight to it, a presence that begged me to read more. So I slipped it into my bag and hurried home, the strange smell of decay lingering in my nostrils long after I had left the field behind. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the diary. I lay in bed, the house eerily silent around me, the weight of the book on my nightstand almost palpable. The name Sarah Adams echoed in my mind, a mystery that begged to be solved. Finally, unable to resist any longer, I sat up and opened the diary to the first page. The ink was faded in places, but the handwriting was still legible, each word written with a careful precision that seemed almost unnatural for a teenage girl. May 12, 1996, it began. Today was my birthday. Mom made me a cake, and Dad even came home early from work. It was nice, I guess, but it felt off, like everyone was pretending to be happy. I could tell Mom had been crying again. She always cries when she thinks I'm not looking. And Dad, well, he barely said a word. He never does anymore. The entry was mundane, the typical musings of a girl who was just beginning to understand the cracks in her family. But something about the tone felt off. There was a tension beneath the surface, something unspoken. I turned the page, eager to read more. May 13, 1996, the next entry read. The nightmares are getting worse. I keep seeing the same thing. I'm in the woods behind the house, but it's not right. Everything is darker, twisted. The trees look like they're alive, their branches reaching out for me. And there's this figure. I can't see its face, but I know it's watching me, waiting. My heart pounded as I read the words. The woods behind her house, the same woods I had been exploring when I found the diary. I felt a chill run down my spine, the room suddenly feeling colder. I glanced at the window, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness beyond the glass. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the night. I turned the page again, desperate to know more. May 14, 1996, the next entry began. I saw it today, the figure from my dreams. I was in the woods, trying to get away from the house for a bit when I felt it. That same feeling from the nightmare, the feeling of being watched. I turned around and there it was, standing just at the edge of the trees. It was so tall, taller than any person I've ever seen. And its face, I can't describe it. It's like it had no face at all, just this dark, empty space where it should be. I slammed the diary shut, my heart racing. My eyes flickered to the window again, the darkness outside seeming to press in on the glass. I had explored those very woods today. Had something been watching me too? The rational part of my brain told me it was just a story, a teenager's imagination running wild. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. I could almost feel Sarah's fear seeping through the pages, her terror bleeding into my own thoughts. The following days were consumed by Sarah's diary. Each night, I would read another entry, drawn deeper into her world. The entries started innocently enough, descriptions of her mundane life, arguments with her parents, school drama, but soon they became darker, more frantic. May 17, 1996, one entry read, "I told Mom about the figure, but she didn't believe me. She says it's just my imagination, that I'm just stressed out from school. But I know what I saw, it's real, and it's getting closer. Every night it's in my dreams, watching, waiting. I feel like it's coming for me." May 19, 1996, another said, "I can't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, it's there. Last night I woke up and saw it standing outside my window. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring with that empty face. I screamed, but when Mom came running in, it was gone." By the time I reached the final entry, I was completely captivated by Sarah's story. Her descent into paranoia, her fear of the figure that haunted her dreams and her waking life, it felt all too real. The final entry was dated May 24th, 1996. It was the last day anyone had seen Sarah Adams alive. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. The figure is getting closer. Every night it's closer. Last night I woke up and it was in my room, just standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It didn't do anything, it just watched me. And then when I blinked, it was gone. I think it wants me to go into the woods. I can hear it whispering to me now, even during the day. It calls my name, tells me to come closer, to follow it. I don't know if I can resist anymore. I'm so tired, so tired." That was it. The diary ended there. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. I sat there in my darkened room, the book lying open in my lap, my mind racing. What had happened to Sarah? Had she gone into the woods like the figure wanted? Had she ever come back? The rational part of me wanted to believe that it was all just a figment of her imagination, a manifestation of a troubled mind. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, believed her. That night, as I tried to sleep, I could swear I heard it too. The faintest whisper, carried on the wind outside my window. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Sarah's story. Something that hadn't been uncovered. The police had searched the woods when she disappeared. But what if they had missed something? What if the diary held the key to finding out what had really happened to her? I grabbed a flashlight and headed back to the woods, determined to follow in Sarah's footsteps. The air felt heavy as I walked deeper into the trees, the sunlight barely breaking through the thick canopy overhead. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. I found the oak tree again, the place where I had discovered the diary. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where it had been buried. Something about the area felt off, like the air was thicker, harder to breathe. I took a step forward, and that's when I saw it. A faint trail leading deeper into the woods. The ground was disturbed, the leaves pushed aside as if someone had walked through recently. My heart raced as I followed the trail, each step taking me further away from the safety of my house. The deeper I went, the more the woods seemed to change. The trees grew closer together, their gnarled branches twisting overhead like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, and the familiar sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling, faded away, replaced by an unsettling silence. Then, up ahead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A small, dilapidated shack stood in the middle of a clearing, its roof caved in and its windows shattered. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but something about it felt wrong. Like it didn't belong there. I approached slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as I stepped inside. The air inside the shack was musty, filled with the scent of rot and decay. There was nothing remarkable about the interior. Just a few broken pieces of furniture and a pile of old, yellowed papers scattered across the floor. But then I saw it. In the corner of the room, half hidden beneath a pile of rubble, was a door. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it sent a shiver down my spine the moment I saw it. I knew, instinctively, that this was where Sarah had gone. With trembling hands, I pushed the rubble aside and opened the door. A set of narrow stone stairs led down into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step I took. The stairs seemed to stretch forever into the earth. Each step echoed against the cold stone walls, creating a hollow sound that reverberated in the silence. My flashlight's beam flickered, as if the air itself was too thick for the light to cut through. I swallowed hard, my breath shallow, heart pounding. About halfway down, the oppressive smell of rot grew stronger, clinging to the damp air. The scent of decay, of something old and long forgotten, filled my lungs. It reminded me of the diary, that faint, sickly smell that had clung to its pages. I hesitated, my instincts screaming to turn back, but something urged me forward. The sense that I had to know what had happened to Sarah gnawed at me. I had to see it through. At the bottom of the stairs, the narrow passage opened into a large, cavernous room. My flashlight swept across the walls, revealing strange markings carved into the stone. Symbols I didn't recognize. The room had the feeling of a tomb, and in the center of the floor was a circular pit, about 6 feet wide, filled with a thick, dark liquid that reflected nothing. It absorbed the light, pulling it in like a black hole. I stepped closer, my heart hammering in my chest. The pit felt alive, like it was breathing, and as I neared it, the faintest of whispers brushed against my ears. "Come closer." I froze, my body tingling with fear. It was the same voice Sarah had described in her diary. I didn't know where it was coming from, whether it was in the air around me or inside my own head. But I could hear it, faint and insidious, like a memory that had been locked away in the corners of my mind. Sarah. The whisper called her name. The voice was growing louder, and with it came a faint sense of dread, like something was watching me from just beyond the light of my flashlight. I backed away from the pit, feeling the heavy presence in the room closing in. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I heard it, a slow, shuffling sound, like something dragging itself across the stone floor. I whipped the flashlight toward the source of the noise, but saw nothing. The sound stopped for a moment, and then resumed louder this time, closer. My breathing quickened as I backed toward the stairs, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of movement. "Sarah," the voice whispered again, clearer now. And then, from the far end of the room, something moved. A figure emerged from the darkness, slowly stepping into the faint circle of light cast by my flashlight. My heart dropped into my stomach as I saw it. The tall, faceless figure Sarah had described in her diary. Its body was unnaturally thin, its limbs elongated, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. And its face, if you could call it that, was just a blank, empty space. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my throat. The figure stood motionless for a moment, as though studying me. Then it took a step forward. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the uneven floor, and I fell to the ground. The figure moved closer, slow and deliberate, its shadow stretching across the room, swallowing the light. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief moment of darkness I felt a cold hand brush against my ankle. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, but the figure didn't follow. It remained where it was, standing at the edge of the pit, its head tilted slightly, as though listening. And then, in a voice so quiet it was barely audible, it spoke. "She's here." I didn't know how I got out of the shack. It was all a blur. The stairs, the pit, that thing standing in the darkness. I ran as fast as I could, my legs barely able to carry me. The sun had begun to set by the time I reached the edge of the woods, the light casting long shadows across the ground. My heart was still pounding in my chest. The image of that faceless figure burned into my mind. I collapsed onto the porch of my house, gasping for breath, the diary still clutched in my hand. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, the weight of everything hit me all at once. Sarah had been telling the truth. The figure she had written about, the one she had seen in the woods, the one that had been watching her, it was real, and it was still there, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the floor of my living room, flipping through the pages of Sarah's diary, searching for anything I had missed. There had to be something, some clue, some explanation for what I had seen. And then, in the very back of the diary, I found it. A loose page, folded and tucked between the final entries. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it felt like it had been waiting for me to find it. I unfolded the page carefully, my hands trembling as I read the words written there in Sarah's familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, it's too late. You've seen it too. The figure, the thing that's been haunting me. It won't let me go. I can feel it getting closer every day. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not going to stop until it has me. I've tried to resist. I've tried to stay away from the woods, but it's calling to me. I hear it every night. It wants me to follow. I don't think I can hold out much longer. If you find this, don't go looking for me. Don't come after me, please. I don't want to drag anyone else into this. Just burn the diary. Destroy it before it can find someone else. Please. The page slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. I sat there, stunned, the weight of Sarah's words settling over me like a shroud. She had known. She had known that something was coming for her, and she had tried to warn me. But it was too late. For the next few days, I stayed inside, too afraid to go back into the woods. But the diary, Sarah's final plea, hung over me. I should have burned it. I should have destroyed it like she asked. But I couldn't. Some part of me, some twisted curiosity kept me from doing it. I needed to know more. And then the whispers started. At first, it was subtle. A faint sound, like wind brushing against the windows late at night. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, clearer. I would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, certain I had heard someone calling my name. The figure was watching me now. I could feel its presence, lurking in the shadows just beyond my vision. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel it. The air around me would grow colder, the world falling silent. And then, one night, it appeared. I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The house was quiet, the world outside pitch black. And then I heard it, the slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. The sound of something scraping against the wood. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, straining to hear. There was a knock on the door, soft, almost hesitant, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I didn't move, I didn't dare get up. And then from just outside my window I heard the voice. Come outside. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I could feel it closing in, suffocating me with its presence. The whispers, the footsteps, they wouldn't stop. So I made a decision. I had to end it. I had to go back to the woods. The sun was just beginning to rise as I made my way through the trees, the diary in my hand. The air was thick with the same oppressive silence I had felt before, and I knew the figure was watching, waiting. The trail led me back to the shack, and as I approached, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The door was still ajar, the stairs leading down into the darkness. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I knew what I had to do. I descended the stairs, my flashlight flickering in the cold, damp air. The pit was still there, the black liquid still as dark and foreboding as before. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the diary to the final page, the loose one that had been tucked inside, and dropped it into the pit. The moment the page touched the surface, the liquid began to ripple, as if something beneath the surface was stirring. And then, from the darkness beyond the pit, the figure emerged. It stood there, watching me with its empty face, its long, thin fingers reaching toward the pit. But this time, I didn't run. I stood my ground, my heart racing, and spoke the words that had been haunting me since the night I found the diary. I'm not afraid of you. The figure paused, its body still, and then slowly it began to dissolve into the darkness. The whispers faded, the cold air lifted, and for the first time since I had found the diary, I felt free. I never went back to the woods after that day. The figure was gone, the whispers silenced, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was still out there, her spirit finally at peace. I moved away from the house not long after, leaving the diary behind, buried deep in the woods where it belonged. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faintest whisper on the wind, calling my name. And I wonder if the figure is truly gone, or if it's just waiting for someone else to find Sarah's diary. Story 2. It all started the day I moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of town. I hadn't intended to buy such a large, imposing place, but something about it had drawn me in. It was one of those houses that you could tell had history. It stood tall, the sharp angles of its roof jutting into the sky, its dark wooden exterior weathered by years of storms and neglect. The real estate agent had assured me it was structurally sound, but even she had seemed eager to leave as soon as I signed the papers. Inside, the house had high ceilings, ornate woodwork, and tall, narrow windows that let in shafts of pale light. Dust motes danced in the air, and the wooden floors creaked with every step. It had a certain charm to it, though, a kind of faded grandeur that made me imagine the lives that had passed through its halls over the years. The only thing that felt truly out of place was the large mirror in the upstairs hallway. I noticed it right away as I climbed the sweeping staircase to the second floor. It was enormous, taking up nearly the entire wall opposite the staircase, with an intricately carved wooden frame that looked ancient. The glass was slightly fogged with age, its surface warped in places, distorting reflections. The mirror gave me an uneasy feeling. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen before, and something about it seemed off. I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, but I made a mental note to eventually move it somewhere less prominent. For now, though, I had bigger things to worry about, like unpacking boxes and making this old house feel like home. That first night, as I lay in bed, I found it hard to sleep. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows, and the house groaned and creaked with the sounds of settling wood and time. Every so often, I would hear a strange noise, the faintest scraping sound, that seemed to be coming from the hallway just outside my bedroom door. Each time, I'd hold my breath, straining to hear more, but the sound would fade away before I could make sense of it. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off into a restless sleep. It wasn't until the next morning that I started noticing the mirror again. As I passed it on my way downstairs, I caught my reflection out of the corner of my eye. For a split second, something seemed wrong with the image. My reflection seemed slower than it should have been, like it had lagged behind me as I moved. I stopped and stared into the glass, but everything seemed normal. I chalked it up to my grogginess and continued on, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Over the next few days, as I settled into the house, the mirror became harder to ignore. Every time I passed it, I'd feel a strange pull, like it was drawing my gaze toward it. Sometimes I would find myself standing in front of it without realizing how I had gotten there, staring into my own reflection. My face looked the same, my movements mirrored as they should be, but the longer I stared, the more I felt like something was watching me from the other side of the glass. One afternoon, as I stood there gazing into the mirror, I thought I saw something move behind me in the reflection, a flicker of shadow, darting just out of sight. I spun around, my heart racing, but the hallway was empty. I stood there for a long moment, my breath coming in short gasps, but nothing happened. Shaking off the nerves, I laughed at myself, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I was alone in the house. There was no one else there. That night, the dreams started. They were strange, vivid dreams in which I would find myself standing in front of the mirror in the hallway. In the dream, the reflection in the mirror was wrong. It wasn't just me staring back. It was a distorted version of myself. My face looked warped, my eyes sunken and hollow, and my movements were jerky, unnatural. I would try to turn away, but the reflection wouldn't move with me. It stayed there, watching, its expression slowly shifting into a cruel, mocking smile. Each time I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd lie there in the darkness, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone in the room. As the days went on, the disturbances began to spill into my waking life. I started hearing noises in the house, soft whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. The sound of footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door at night, and that same scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across wood. The mirror had become a source of dread for me. I avoided looking at it whenever possible, but sometimes I would catch a glimpse of something in the reflection, a flash of movement, a shadow that shouldn't be there. And always, I had the feeling that something was watching me. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I passed the mirror and froze. This time, there was no mistaking it. There was a figure standing in the reflection, just behind me. It was faint, almost translucent, but I could see it clearly. A woman, her face obscured by long dark hair, standing in the hallway just behind me. My blood ran cold as I turned around, expecting to see her standing there, but the hallway was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and she was gone. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure I had seen in the mirror. Who was she? And why was she appearing in the reflection? I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew there was something more to it. The next day, I decided to do some research on the house. I spent hours digging through old town records and newspaper archives, searching for anything that might explain the strange occurrences. That's when I found it, an old article from the 1920s about a woman named Eleanor Bennett. She had lived in the house with her husband, but after a series of mysterious events, she had gone missing. Her body was never found, but according to the article, some people believed that she had been murdered by her husband and buried somewhere on the property. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman I had seen in the mirror was Eleanor. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, staring into the glass, waiting for something to happen. The house was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. For a long time, nothing happened. I stood there, my reflection staring back at me, perfectly normal. But just as I was about to give up and go to bed, I saw it. The faintest flicker of movement in the corner of the mirror. The woman was back. This time, she was clearer, more solid. She stood just behind me, her face still hidden by her dark hair. My heart raced as I watched her in the reflection, afraid to move, afraid to look away. Slowly, she lifted her head and I saw her face for the first time. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were hollow, sunken into her skull. She looked like a corpse, her face twisted in a grotesque expression of sorrow and rage. And then, she spoke. "Help me." I stumbled back, nearly falling over as the woman's voice echoed in my mind. It wasn't a sound I had heard with my ears. It was as though her words had been whispered directly into my thoughts. I stood there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. I glanced back at the mirror, but the woman was gone. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and pale, as though nothing had happened. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew what I had heard. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was she? Was she really Eleanor Bennett? And what did she want from me? The word help echoed in my mind, over and over again, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. But what? The next morning, I returned to the archives, hoping to find more information about Eleanor's disappearance. I scoured every article, every record I could find, but there was nothing that gave me any answers. It was as though she had simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but rumors and speculation. Frustrated and exhausted, I returned home, my mind racing with questions. As I walked through the front door, I felt a cold breeze pass through the house, chilling me to the bone. The air felt different, heavier, more oppressive. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house creaking and groaning around me. Every so often, I would hear the faintest whisper, like a distant voice carried on the wind. "Help me." I got out of bed and walked to the hallway, drawn toward the mirror. It stood there, looming over the staircase, its surface fogged with age. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding, before stepping closer. As I stood in front of the mirror, the air around me grew colder. I could see my breath, fogging the glass in front of me. And then, slowly, the woman appeared. She was clearer this time, more solid. Her eyes met mine through the glass, and I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me. She looked so lost. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. The woman in the mirror began to appear more frequently after that. Each time she seemed more desperate, her plea for help growing more insistent. I tried to ignore her, to push the strange occurrences out of my mind, but it became impossible. The house itself seemed to come alive. Doors would open and close on their own, and strange noises echoed through the halls at all hours of the night. I could feel the woman's presence everywhere, like she was watching me, waiting for me to do something. I became obsessed with the mirror. Every day I would stand in front of it, hoping to learn more about her, to understand what she wanted from me. But every time she appeared, all she would say was the same thing: "Help me." I started having vivid nightmares, in which I would find myself trapped in the mirror, unable to escape. The woman would be there with me, her hollow eyes staring into mine, her cold hand reaching out to touch me. Each time I would wake up in a cold sweat, the feeling of her fingers lingering on my skin. I didn't know what to do. The more I tried to help her, the more she seemed to take over my life. I became isolated, cutting myself off from friends and family, spending all my time in the house, obsessed with the mirror. And then one night, something changed. As I stood in front of the mirror, the woman appeared as usual. But this time, she didn't just ask for help. She stepped forward, her body pressing against the glass, her hand reaching out toward me. "Take my hand," she whispered. I hesitated, my heart racing. Every instinct told me not to, that something was horribly wrong. But I couldn't resist. Something inside me compelled me to reach out. My hand hovered in front of the glass, just inches from hers. I could feel the cold air radiating from the mirror, seeping into my skin. "Please," she whispered again, her voice trembling. My hand trembled as it hovered in front of the glass, the cold air wrapping around my fingers like invisible tendrils. The woman's pale, ghostly hand remained outstretched from the mirror, waiting. Her eyes, hollow and desperate, locked onto mine, pleading silently for me to act. "Please," she whispered again, and this time her voice was almost a sob. Something inside me, some deep, instinctual fear, screamed at me to stop. But I couldn't pull away. I felt drawn to her, as though there were invisible strings pulling me closer to the mirror, closer to her. Slowly, I lowered my hand until it met the glass. For a moment, there was nothing, just the cold, hard surface of the mirror under my fingertips. I thought maybe I had imagined it all, that none of this was real. But then, with a sickening lurch, the surface of the mirror shifted beneath my hand. It felt as though the glass had turned to liquid, rippling around my fingers as I pressed against it. I gasped, trying to pull my hand back, but it was too late. The woman's icy grip closed around my wrist, her fingers impossibly cold and solid, despite the liquid surface of the mirror. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to yank my arm free, but her strength was overwhelming. She was pulling me in. The mirror's surface rippled and warped as my hand disappeared into the glass. I could feel the cold spreading up my arm, numbing my skin as the woman pulled me closer. Her face was twisted in a grimace, a mixture of desperation and triumph, as she dragged me toward her. "No!" I screamed, panic flooding my body as I struggled to break free. But her grip was unyielding, and the more I fought, the deeper I was pulled into the mirror. My reflection blurred and distorted, the familiar lines of my face twisting into something unrecognizable. I was being pulled into the world inside the mirror. With one final desperate tug, I managed to wrench my arm free. I stumbled backward, crashing into the opposite wall as my hand slipped out of the mirror's grasp. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears that I barely registered the cold sweat clinging to my skin. For a moment, the hallway was deathly silent. I stood there, gasping for breath, staring at the mirror in shock. The glass had returned to its solid state, and my reflection looked back at me, wide-eyed and pale. But the woman was still there. She stood just behind me in the reflection, her hand still outstretched, her hollow eyes filled with rage. "You promised!" she screamed, her voice echoing inside my mind. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the door, my mind racing with panic and confusion. What had just happened? Who, or what, was she? And why did she want me to help her? I collapsed onto the bed, my mind swirling with fear and exhaustion. But as I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, I realized one thing: I couldn't stay here any longer. The next morning, I made up my mind. I had to leave the house. The mirror was cursed, haunted by the spirit of the woman who was trapped inside. I couldn't let her pull me in. I couldn't let her have control over me. I packed quickly, shoving clothes and essentials into a suitcase. Every time I passed the hallway, I could feel the pull of the mirror, could sense the woman watching me from the glass. But I avoided looking at it, knowing that if I did, she might find a way to drag me back to her. As I carried my bags down the stairs, the house groaned and creaked around me, as though it were alive. The air was thick, suffocating, and the whispers that I had once thought were my imagination had grown louder, more insistent. They echoed in every corner of the house, filling my head with a cacophony of voices, all of them whispering the same thing: "Help her, help her, help her." I flung open the front door, stepping outside into the crisp morning air. The moment I left the house, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. The oppressive atmosphere of the house seemed to fade as soon as I crossed the threshold, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe freely. I locked the door behind me, my heart racing, and started down the path that led away from the house. But as I reached the gate, I hesitated. What if the woman was still trapped? What if I was the only one who could help her? The thought gnawed at me, but I shook it off. I couldn't go back. Whatever was in that mirror, whatever that woman was, it wasn't my responsibility. I had to get out of there before I became the next victim. I stayed away from the house for several days, renting a room at a motel on the other side of town. I tried to focus on anything else, work, errands, anything that could keep my mind off what had happened. But the mirror haunted my thoughts. Every night I dreamed of the woman's hollow eyes, of her cold hand reaching out from the glass, and every night I heard her voice in my head whispering, "Help me." It didn't take long before I started to wonder if I had made a mistake. Maybe she really was trapped in that mirror. Maybe she was a victim, and I had left her there, abandoned and forgotten. Against my better judgment, I decided to go back. The house loomed in the distance as I approached it, its dark windows staring out like empty eyes. The wind howled through the trees, and the sky above was a dull gray, heavy with the threat of rain. My hands trembled as I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was silent, the air heavy with the same oppressive energy I had felt before. I made my way to the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the wooden floors. The mirror stood in its usual place, the glass fogged with age but otherwise still and silent. I took a deep breath and stepped closer. The moment I looked into the glass, I saw her. The woman was there, standing just behind me, her face twisted in an expression of sorrow and anger. Her eyes locked onto mine through the reflection, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. "You came back," she whispered, her voice soft, almost tender. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with fear. "I need you to help me," she said again, her voice more insistent this time. "I can't leave, not without your help." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "What do you want me to do?" Her reflection shifted, and I saw her raise her hand again, pressing it against the glass. "Take my hand," she whispered. I stared at the glass, at her outstretched hand. I had come back to help her, but now, standing here in front of the mirror, I wasn't sure if I could do it. I wasn't sure if I could trust her. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling with desperation. "I can't do it alone." I hesitated, my mind racing. But something inside me, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was some twisted sense of duty, compelled me to act. Slowly, I raised my hand and pressed it against the glass. The moment my hand touched the surface of the mirror, it rippled like water, and I felt that same cold sensation crawl up my arm. But this time, I didn't pull away. I let the cold wash over me, numbing my skin as my hand sank deeper into the glass. The woman's fingers wrapped around mine, her grip cold and firm. I expected her to pull me in, but instead I felt a strange sensation, as though I were being pulled into a different place entirely, not just into the mirror, but into another world. The hallway around me began to blur, the edges of reality distorting and bending as I was drawn deeper into the glass. The walls, the floor, the house itself seemed to melt away, leaving only the mirror and the woman standing in front of me. I was no longer in the house, I was in the mirror. Everything around me was a reflection of the real world, but twisted, distorted. The air was thick and heavy, and the sky above was a dark, swirling mass of clouds. The house was there, but it was wrong. Decayed, crumbling, as though it had been abandoned for centuries. The woman stood in front of me, her hollow eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and echoing in the empty space. I stared at her, my heart racing. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This is where I've been trapped," she said. "For so long, I've been waiting for someone to come." "How do we get out?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. The woman's expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw something dark in her eyes. "There is no way out," she whispered. "Not for you." Before I could react, she lunged toward me, her cold hands wrapping around my throat. I gasped, trying to pull away, but her grip was like iron. The world around me spun, and I felt the coldness of the mirror seeping into my body, freezing me from the inside out. "You're mine now," she hissed, her voice filled with malice. I don't know how long I've been here, trapped in the mirror's reflection. Time doesn't seem to exist in this place. The woman is always with me, her presence a constant, suffocating weight. I see the real world, but only through the glass. I see people come and go, oblivious to the fact that I'm here, watching them, screaming for help. But no one ever hears me. No one ever sees me. I am trapped, just like she was. And now, I wait. For the next person to come. For the next person to take my place. Story 3. The road stretched endlessly before me, dark and empty, illuminated only by the dull glow of my headlights. It was one of those nights where the air felt thick and the darkness pressed down on the world, swallowing everything outside the small circle of light cast by my car. The clock on the dashboard read 1:45 a.m., but it felt later, as though time itself had slowed down. I had been driving for hours, trying to stay awake as I made my way back from visiting my parents in the next state over. It was a journey I had taken many times before, but something about this night felt different. The air was heavy with an unsettling stillness, and there wasn't another car in sight, just me, the road, and the darkness. The radio crackled faintly, playing some static-filled classic rock station that I barely noticed. My mind was drifting, my eyelids growing heavier with each passing minute. I slapped my cheeks lightly, trying to shake off the drowsiness. The last thing I needed was to fall asleep behind the wheel. I turned up the volume on the radio, hoping the noise would keep me awake. As I fumbled with the dial, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a shadow cast by the trees lining the road. But as I looked closer, my heart skipped a beat. There in the back seat was the faint outline of a figure. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. There was no one else in the car. I had been driving alone for hours. But the more I stared into the rearview mirror, the more certain I became that there was something, or someone, sitting in the back seat. A chill ran down my spine, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My first instinct was to pull over, to get out of the car and check, but something stopped me. Some deep, primal fear told me that I didn't want to know what, or who, was back there. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. The long drive was messing with my head, making me see things that weren't really there. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing mile. The figure in the rearview mirror didn't move, but I couldn't shake the sensation of its presence. I kept stealing glances at the mirror, hoping each time that it would vanish, that I would finally see an empty back seat. But it remained there, a faint, shadowy outline, like a dark smudge on the glass. I turned the radio up louder, trying to drown out the growing panic in my chest. My hands were slick with sweat as they gripped the steering wheel, and I could feel my pulse racing in my ears. The road stretched on, the darkness outside seeming to press in closer, suffocating me. Then I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear over the noise of the car and the static-filled music. But it was there, unmistakable, a soft, breathy sound coming from the back seat. I froze, my blood running cold. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen, my ears suddenly hyper-aware of every sound around me. The whisper came again, slightly louder this time. "Turn around," I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat. The voice was so close, like someone was sitting right behind me, leaning in to speak into my ear. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My mind screamed at me to keep driving, to get as far away from this as possible. But the voice persisted, soft and insistent. "Turn around." I pressed down on the gas pedal, my car speeding up as I fought the overwhelming urge to look back. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. The whisper came again, more urgent this time. "Turn around and see." I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. The presence in the back seat felt more real with every passing second, and the whispering voice was like nails on a chalkboard, scraping away at my sanity. But I kept driving, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead, even though the temptation to look back was almost unbearable. Suddenly, the voice stopped. The car fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the low hum of the engine and the faint crackle of the radio. I felt a flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. Up ahead in the distance, I saw something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A lone figure standing by the edge of the highway, their thumb outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. I slowed down, my heart pounding. Who would be out here, on this empty road in the middle of the night? The figure was hard to make out in the darkness, but they seemed to be wearing a long coat, their face obscured by a hood or hat. Against my better judgment, I eased the car to a stop a few feet ahead of the hitchhiker. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe I was hoping that picking up this person would somehow distract me from the terror that had been building inside me. I leaned over and rolled down the passenger window. The cold night air rushed into the car, making me shiver. "Need a ride?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The hitchhiker didn't answer right away. They stood there for a moment, as if considering the offer. Then, without a word, they walked toward the car. As they approached, I noticed something strange. Their footsteps made no sound. The gravel on the side of the road didn't crunch beneath their shoes, and the wind didn't seem to affect the long coat they were wearing. It was as if they were gliding toward me, weightless and silent. The figure stopped by the passenger door, and I reached over to unlock it. But before I could, they were already inside the car, seated beside me without having opened the door. My heart leaped into my throat. How had they gotten in? I hadn't even unlocked the door yet. I stared at the figure in the passenger seat, my mind racing. Their face was still hidden in shadow, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Where are you headed?" I asked, my voice shaky. The hitchhiker didn't answer. They just sat there, staring straight ahead, their hands resting on their knees. A sense of dread settled over me, heavier than before. I had the overwhelming feeling that I had made a terrible mistake by stopping. I tried to ignore the hitchhiker's unsettling silence and focused on driving, but the atmosphere in the car had shifted. The air felt thick and oppressive, like I was being smothered by an invisible weight. Every nerve in my body was on edge, and I could feel the hitchhiker's presence beside me, even though they hadn't moved or spoken since getting into the car. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't take the silence any longer. "Where should I drop you off?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The hitchhiker finally turned to me, their face still obscured by the shadows. I could feel their gaze boring into me, cold and unfeeling. Without warning, the whisper returned. But this time, it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from the hitchhiker. "Look in the mirror." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice was the same as before, soft, breathy, and terrifyingly close. But now it was coming from the figure sitting just inches away from me. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what was in the rearview mirror. But something compelled me, some dark force that I couldn't resist. Slowly, my eyes drifted to the mirror. My heart nearly stopped. The back seat wasn't empty. There, sitting right behind me, was a figure, the same shadowy outline I had seen before. But now, it was clearer. I could see its eyes, hollow and glowing faintly in the darkness. Its face was twisted into a grotesque grin, and its hand was resting on the back of my seat, as though it was reaching for me. I gasped, jerking my gaze away from the mirror. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing with panic. The hitchhiker turned their head slightly, as if sensing my fear. "You've picked up more than one passenger tonight," the whispering voice said, echoing in my mind. I couldn't breathe. The air in the car felt suffocating, and the presence of the hitchhiker and the figure in the back seat pressed down on me like a vice. My thoughts were a chaotic swirl of fear and confusion. I needed to get out of there. I needed to escape. But as I glanced at the hitchhiker again, something shifted. The shadows around their face began to melt away, revealing pale skin and hollow eyes that matched those of the figure in the back seat. Their mouth twisted into a cruel smile, and I realized with a sickening jolt that they were the same. The hitchhiker and the figure in the back seat, they were both the same entity, both watching me, both waiting for something. "You can't run," the whisper said, filling my head. "You can't escape. We are with you now." I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, the car lurching forward as I sped down the empty road. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still with me, their cold, hollow eyes following my every move. My mind was unraveling, the terror too much to bear. I wanted to scream, to pull over and run, but I knew it was useless. They were with me now. I had let them in. The road stretched on, endless and unchanging, as though I had been driving in circles for hours. The night seemed darker than before, the world outside the car swallowed by shadows. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight that my knuckles were white, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, my heart pounding. The figure was still there, sitting in the back seat, watching me with that same twisted grin. And the hitchhiker beside me had remained silent, but I could feel their presence, cold and menacing. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The hitchhiker turned to face me, their hollow eyes boring into mine. "You've already arrived," they said, their voice soft and echoing inside my mind. I blinked, confused. What did they mean? I was still driving, still on the same empty road. But then I realized something. The road ahead, it wasn't the same as before. The trees, the signs, everything had changed. I was no longer on the highway. The landscape around me was unfamiliar, twisted and wrong, like I had driven into a place that shouldn't exist. "You're home now," the hitchhiker whispered. Panic surged through me, and I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, and I threw open the door, stumbling out into the darkness. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it didn't matter. I had to get away from them. I turned to look at the car, but what I saw made my blood run cold. There was no car. There was no road. A figure from the back seat standing before me, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You're one of us now," they whispered, their voices blending together. And then everything went black. I don't know how long I've been here, trapped in this endless, dark place. Time doesn't seem to exist here. The hitchhiker and the figure from the back seat are always with me, their eyes watching, waiting. I don't know what they want from me, but I can feel their presence, suffocating and inescapable. I try to remember what my life was like before, but the memories are fading. The road, the car, my home, it all seems so distant, like a dream that I can barely recall. All I know now is this darkness, this emptiness. I am the unseen passenger now, and I will wait, just as they waited, for someone to pick me up, for someone to take my place. The night was quiet, and the road was empty as a lone driver made their way down the highway. They had been driving for hours, the dark stretch of road seemingly endless. The radio played softly in the background, but the driver barely noticed. Their mind was drifting, drowsiness beginning to set in. Up ahead, in the distance, they saw a figure standing by the side of the road. A hitchhiker. The driver slowed down, pulling over to the side of the road. As the hitchhiker approached, the driver rolled down the window, offering a ride. The hitchhiker climbed into the car, their face hidden in shadow. The driver didn't notice the second figure sitting in the back seat. They didn't hear the whispering voices. Not yet. As the driver pulled back onto the highway, the atmosphere in the car shifted. There was a palpable tension that filled the air, thick and oppressive. The hitchhiker sat quietly beside the driver, their face still obscured by shadows, while the back seat remained a mystery. "Where are you headed?" the driver asked, trying to break the silence. The question hung in the air, unacknowledged. The hitchhiker remained still, their eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if lost in thought. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something unusual. But the back seat was empty. They shook their head, dismissing the sensation of being watched as mere fatigue from the long drive. After all, it was just them on this quiet stretch of road. But the moment faded quickly as the eerie silence returned. The hitchhiker turned their head slightly, and in that fleeting glance, the driver could have sworn they saw the outline of something dark, something that shouldn't be there, swirling just outside the periphery of their vision. "Are you okay?" the driver asked, concern threading their voice. The hitchhiker turned to look, and for the first time, they spoke. "Just keep driving," the hitchhiker said softly. Their voice was almost hypnotic, laced with an otherworldly quality that made the driver shiver. "You'll be safe if you keep going." A sense of dread washed over the driver, but they didn't know why. They pressed the gas pedal harder, the car lurching forward into the night, hoping to shake off the unease that gripped them. The radio crackled, briefly drowning out the oppressive silence before fading back into static. As the miles slipped away beneath the tires, the driver felt a strange pull toward the hitchhiker. There was something about them, something that felt both familiar and frightening. It was as if a veil of memories hung in the air, teasing at the edges of the driver's mind. Suddenly, the driver remembered a story from years ago about a similar encounter, a tale of a hitchhiker who led a driver to a place from which they could never return. The driver dismissed the thought, chuckling nervously. Surely that was just an urban legend. But as they drove, a thick fog began to roll in, cloaking the road ahead. The headlights struggled to penetrate the mist, illuminating the figures in the car but casting ominous shadows on the surroundings. The driver squinted through the haze, trying to keep focus on the road, but it was getting harder to see. "Don't worry," the hitchhiker said, their voice a calming whisper amidst the chaos. "You're doing great, just keep your eyes on the road." It felt like a command, and the driver found themselves unable to resist. They focused intently on the road ahead, pushing aside their doubts and fears. But that only made the feeling of being watched grow stronger. There was something waiting, lurking in the darkness, something unseen yet palpably present. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the rearview mirror caught the driver's attention. The figure in the back seat was there again, the dark outline more pronounced against the backdrop of the fog. Panic surged through the driver, and they stole another glance at the hitchhiker, who remained unnervingly calm. "Just ignore it," the hitchhiker said, their tone almost soothing. "It's not here for you." A chill ran down the driver's spine. What did that mean? The grip on the steering wheel tightened as they fought the urge to turn around, to confront whatever was lurking behind them. Minutes felt like hours as the driver continued down the winding road. The fog thickened around them, swallowing the world outside the car. The oppressive silence weighed heavily, the only sound the soft hum of the engine and the driver's increasingly erratic heartbeat. "Do you believe in fate?" the hitchhiker asked suddenly, breaking the silence. The driver glanced sideways, surprised by the question. I suppose so." "Why do you ask?" "Because you're at a crossroads, and every choice has consequences," the hitchhiker replied cryptically. Their gaze shifted toward the front window, as if they could see something beyond the fog that the driver could not. The driver felt a sense of foreboding wash over them. "What do you mean?" The hitchhiker smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was twisted and knowing, as if they held secrets that were far too dangerous to share. "You'll find out soon enough." As the words hung in the air, the driver's heart raced. They felt trapped, like a marionette dancing on strings, pulled in directions they didn't understand. They wanted to turn around, to escape the strange passenger and the figure that had taken root in their mind. But as if sensing their hesitation, the hitchhiker leaned in closer, their voice a mere whisper. "You can't turn back now, you've already invited us in." The driver felt a wave of panic crash over them. The realization hit hard, as if a door had been flung open in their mind. They had picked up the hitchhiker willingly, and by doing so, they had also invited the unseen figure into their life. The choice had been made, and now there was no going back. The fog continued to thicken, and the atmosphere inside the car grew increasingly oppressive. The driver stole another glance in the rearview mirror, and this time, they weren't surprised to see the figure was now leaning forward, closer to the back of the driver's seat, its hollow eyes boring into them. Fear surged, and the driver pressed down on the gas, wanting to escape the presence behind them. But the more they accelerated, the slower time seemed to pass. The world outside morphed into a hazy blur, and the driver could feel a darkness creeping in, suffocating them. "What do you want?" the driver shouted, their voice breaking the silence. The hitchhiker chuckled softly. "What do we want? We want you to understand." "Understand what?" the driver demanded, their heart pounding. The hitchhiker leaned closer, their eyes glinting in the faint light. You're not just a driver anymore. You're part of the story, part of something much bigger. Suddenly, the figure in the back seat spoke, its voice low and sinister. You are in the driver's seat of fate, my dear, and it's time for you to choose. Choose what? The driver asked, panic bubbling to the surface. Choose how this story ends, the figure said, its twisted grin widening. You can join us, or you can continue driving, pretending nothing has changed. But know this, the longer you drive, the more you risk losing yourself. The driver's hands trembled on the steering wheel as they wrestled with the words. The fog was now so thick that the headlights barely penetrated it, casting eerie shadows on the interior of the car. They felt trapped, caught in a web of uncertainty and fear. Join you? The driver echoed, their voice barely above a whisper. What does that even mean? The hitchhiker leaned back, their face relaxing into an unsettling calm. It means you embrace the darkness, the uncertainty. It means you accept what you cannot control. The driver felt sick. And if I refuse? The figure in the back seat leaned closer, its breath chilling the air around them. Then you will continue this journey alone, but you will never be free. You will always be haunted by what you refuse to acknowledge. The driver's mind raced. They had always prided themselves on being rational, on believing that they controlled their own fate. But this was something else entirely. A creeping dread filled the pit of their stomach. I can't, the driver said, their voice shaking. I won't. The hitchhiker nodded slowly, and for a moment the darkness seemed to pulse around them. Very well, then we'll continue, and you will see what lies ahead. The car lurched forward, and the driver felt an unseen force guiding the vehicle down the road. The headlights illuminated twisted trees that seemed to reach out toward them, branches clawing at the air like skeletal fingers. The mist thickened, obscuring the path ahead, and the driver could feel their grip on reality slipping away. What is this place? The driver shouted, panic seeping into their voice. Where are we? The hitchhiker remained silent, their gaze fixed on the road as if they could see something the driver could not. The figure in the back seat seemed to be laughing, a low, haunting sound that echoed in the confined space of the car. It's where all roads lead, the hitchhiker finally said, their voice devoid of emotion. It's a place where choices are made, and lives are forever altered. What do you mean? The driver pleaded, desperation clawing at their chest. But the hitchhiker didn't answer. Instead, the car continued to drive forward, the road stretching endlessly before them, leading into the unknown. The world outside the car was a blur, a cacophony of shadows and whispers pressing in on all sides. Suddenly, the fog lifted slightly, revealing a small roadside diner, dimly lit and seemingly abandoned. The neon sign flickered sporadically, casting a ghostly glow over the scene. The driver felt an inexplicable urge to stop. Pull over, the hitchhiker instructed, their voice steady. The driver hesitated but felt compelled to obey. They pulled into the diner's parking lot, the tires crunching on the gravel. The sense of dread intensified, as if the diner were a portal to another realm. The hitchhiker opened the door, and the driver felt a sudden chill as the cool night air rushed in. Come on, the hitchhiker said, stepping out into the darkness. The driver followed, their heart racing. The diner was eerily quiet, the windows fogged over, and the door creaked ominously as it swung open. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered, illuminating the empty booths and sticky countertops. What is this place? The driver asked, a sense of dread pooling in their stomach. It's a resting place, the hitchhiker replied, their voice echoing in the silence. A place for lost souls. The driver's eyes scanned the diner, searching for something, anything, that would explain why they were here. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of smiling patrons, but there was something off about them. Their eyes seemed too vacant, as if they were trapped in a moment that no longer existed. Why are we here? The driver demanded, their voice cracking. To make a choice, the hitchhiker replied, their tone matter of fact. You can leave or you can stay, but know this, once you leave, there's no turning back. The driver felt a cold sweat break out across their forehead. What happens if I stay? The hitchhiker stepped closer, their breath a chilling whisper against the driver's ear. Then you'll learn the truth about what it means to be a passenger in your own life. You'll understand the weight of your choices. The driver looked around. The the walls of the diner seeming to close in on them. The figure in the back seat appeared in the reflection of the diner's glass doors, a dark silhouette grinning maniacally. They felt a wave of nausea wash over them. "I can't," the driver stammered, backing away. "I don't want to be here." But the hitchhiker merely smiled, their eyes shining with an unsettling light. "Then you'll never truly understand." The driver turned to leave, the air thick with tension. They could feel the hitchhiker's gaze burning into their back, and the figure from the back seat lingered just outside their vision, always watching, always waiting. "Wait," the hitchhiker called out, their voice cutting through the fog of fear. "Before you go, look at the photographs." Reluctantly, the driver turned back to the wall of photos, their heart pounding. As they examined the faces, a chill ran down their spine. Each smile seemed forced, the eyes betraying a haunting emptiness. And then they saw it. The hitchhiker was in one of the photos, standing among the patrons, their shadowy form blending in with the rest. The realization hit hard. This diner was a trap, a place where lost souls came to rest, but they never truly left. The hitchhiker was one of them, bound to this place by the choices they had made. "I understand now," the driver said, their voice trembling. "You're one of them." The hitchhiker stepped closer, the smile fading from their face. "Yes, but you have a choice. You can leave this place, but you must confront the darkness within yourself." "What if I don't?" the driver asked, fear gripping their chest. "Then you will become like us, forever trapped in the cycle, forever waiting for the next unsuspecting driver to pick you up," the hitchhiker said softly, their voice almost sad. The driver felt tears prick at the corners of their eyes. They had thought they could simply drive away from their problems, but now it seemed they were running straight toward them. The hitchhiker had offered them a choice, but what lay ahead was uncertain and terrifying. "I don't want to be trapped," the driver said, their voice barely above a whisper. "Then you must confront your fears," the hitchhiker replied, their tone firm. "Only then will you find your way back to the light." With a deep breath, the driver turned back to the door, the weight of the decision settling heavily on their shoulders. They could feel the eyes of the figure watching them from the shadows, waiting for their moment of weakness. "Okay," the driver said, determination swelling within them. "I'll confront whatever I need to confront." The hitchhiker nodded, a flicker of approval in their eyes. "You've made the right choice, but remember, the darkness is not easily vanquished." As the driver stepped outside into the foggy night, they felt a rush of cold air wash over them. The world around them felt charged with energy, as if everything was waiting for them to make their move. The driver took a deep breath, steadying their resolve. They needed to face whatever lay ahead, to confront the fears that had haunted them for so long. As they walked toward the center of the parking lot, the hitchhiker followed closely behind, a shadowy presence that remained ever watchful. "What now?" the driver asked, their heart pounding in their chest. "Now you face your fears," the hitchhiker said, their voice echoing in the night. "You have the power to change your story, but it requires courage." The driver felt the darkness pressing in, shadows twisting and coiling around them. They closed their eyes and concentrated, recalling the things that had haunted them, the failures, the regrets, the doubts that had weighed them down. With each breath, they visualized the fears as tangible forms, dark shapes swirling around them. And with every heartbeat, they felt a surge of power rising within. "I am not afraid of you," the driver shouted into the darkness. "You do not control me." The shadows began to writhe, but the driver stood firm, focusing on the light within. The fog started to dissipate, revealing the world around them in sharp relief. The darkness receded, and the hitchhiker looked on in awe. "Keep going," the hitchhiker urged, their voice filled with excitement. "You're breaking free." As the darkness pulled back, the figure in the back seat emerged from the shadows, its grin fading. The driver could see it more clearly now. It was a reflection of all their fears, their doubts personified. It lunged forward, but the driver held their ground, refusing to be overwhelmed. "I am more than my fears," the driver declared. "I will not be your prisoner." The figure let out a shriek, a sound that echoed through the night like a haunting melody. But the driver's resolve only strengthened. With one final push, they embraced the light within, and the darkness shattered like glass, fragments scattering into the ether. For a moment, everything went still. The hitchhiker stood beside the driver, their eyes wide with astonishment. "You did it!" the hitchhiker exclaimed. "You broke the cycle." The driver looked around, the fog lifting to reveal the diner in all its mundane reality. The photos on the walls no longer felt haunting, but rather like echoes of the past. The presence that had loomed over them was gone, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the driver could breathe freely. As the driver stood there, a sense of clarity washed over them. They felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The hitchhiker turned to them, a smile on their lips, but this time it was warm and genuine. "Now you can choose your own path," the hitchhiker said softly. "You're no longer just a passenger in your own life." The driver nodded, feeling a newfound sense of empowerment. "Thank you. I don't know how I could have done it without you." The hitchhiker smiled, their form shimmering slightly in the light. "You had the strength all along. You just needed to remember it." As the driver turned to leave the diner, the hitchhiker stepped back, a lingering presence that felt comforting rather than threatening. The road ahead beckoned, no longer filled with fear and uncertainty, but with possibility. "I'll always be here," the hitchhiker called out. "Just remember, you're never truly alone." With one last look back, the driver felt gratitude swell in their heart. They climbed into the car, the engine purring to life as they backed out of the parking lot. The mist had lifted, and the road ahead lay open and inviting. As the driver sped down the highway, they felt exhilarated, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The past no longer defined them. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious. The landscape around them shifted as dawn broke, painting the world in hues of orange and pink. The open road stretched ahead, filled with endless possibilities. As the miles slipped away beneath the tires, the driver's heart swelled with hope. They would no longer run from their fears, but instead would face them head-on. The journey ahead was theirs to shape, a canvas waiting for them to create their own story. And with that, they drove on, free and alive, leaving behind the darkness that had once sought to consume them. Story 4. The day we moved into the old house was one I had long anticipated, a long-awaited escape from the city and its suffocating noise. My parents had promised me adventure and mystery, and they were right, though I didn't expect it would come in the form of whispers and shadows lurking just above my head. The house was old, a Victorian structure that creaked and groaned like it had its own life story to tell. The paint was chipped, and the windows were dusty, but there was a charm about it that spoke to my sense of curiosity. My bedroom was on the second floor, directly below the attic, a space that intrigued me from the moment I laid eyes on it. "Don't go poking around in the attic," my dad warned as he carried in a box of books. "It's not safe up there." "Why not?" I asked, my eyes widening with excitement. The idea of an attic filled with forgotten treasures stirred my imagination. He shrugged, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "It's just an old storage space. We'll get to it eventually." But that only fueled my curiosity. What lay behind that door at the top of the staircase? I could almost hear the attic calling to me, beckoning me to explore its secrets. As night fell, the house took on an entirely different character. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the old wood creaked ominously. I settled into my new room, clutching my flashlight like a security blanket, my heart racing with both excitement and fear. My parents were in the living room unpacking boxes, their laughter floating up the staircase. I lay on my bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling, when I heard it, faint but distinct, a soft thump as if something had shifted in the attic. I sat up, my heart pounding. Surely it was just the house adjusting to its new occupants. I tried to convince myself to ignore it, but the sound echoed in my mind, teasing my imagination. Was it possible someone was up there? I hesitated, wrestling with my fears, but curiosity won out. I slipped out of bed, tiptoeing across the creaky floorboards, and made my way to the staircase leading to the attic. The door at the top was old and heavy, adorned with a rusted handle that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I could hear another thump, louder this time, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Taking a deep breath, I grasped the handle and twisted it. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit space filled with dust motes dancing in the air. The attic was larger than I had imagined, filled with boxes and old furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be unveiled. I flicked on my flashlight, casting beams of light across the room. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the scent of mildew filled my nose. It was both eerie and exhilarating. I stepped inside, the wooden floorboards creaking under my weight. And then, it happened again. A soft thump came from somewhere in the darkness, a sound that made my heart race. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling in the stillness. No answer came, just the echo of my own voice fading into the shadows. Determined to find the source of the noise, I moved deeper into the attic, my flashlight illuminating the stacks of boxes and forgotten items. There was an old rocking chair in the corner, its paint peeling, and I shivered as I imagined it rocking back and forth, though I knew there was no wind. "Just a house settling," I murmured to myself, but I didn't believe it. As I explored, I came across a small wooden box tucked away behind a stack of old suitcases. Its surface was scratched and worn, and it seemed to hum with energy as I reached out to touch it. Curiosity bubbled within me. What secrets did it hold? I pulled the box into the light and tried to open it, but it was locked tight. I felt a pang of disappointment, but resolved to find a way to open it later. As I stood up, ready to leave, I heard another noise, this time more pronounced and urgent. It was a rapid series of footsteps, as if someone were pacing back and forth above me. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Who's there?" I called out again, my voice wavering. Silence. I took a cautious step backward, my instincts telling me it was time to leave. The air felt heavier, and an inexplicable chill settled around me. I turned to make my way back to the door when I caught sight of something in the corner of my eye. A shadow darted past one of the windows. It was quick, just a glimpse of movement, but it was enough to send me scrambling back toward the staircase. I stumbled down the steps, my pulse racing, and flung the attic door shut behind me. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house sent my imagination spiraling. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The events of the evening replayed in my mind, the footsteps echoing like a haunting melody. I finally drifted into a restless sleep, filled with nightmares of dark figures lurking in the corners of my room, whispering my name in voices I couldn't understand. I woke up gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, the moonlight filtering through my window casting eerie shadows on the walls. It took me a long time to fall back asleep, and when I did, I dreamt of the attic again. This time, I saw the box. It was glowing, pulsing with a life of its own, beckoning me to open it. As I reached for the latch, a loud bang echoed through the attic, and I woke up again, heart racing. The next day, I decided I needed to know more about the house and its history. After breakfast, I approached my parents, who were busy unpacking in the living room. "Do you guys know anything about the attic?" I asked, trying to sound casual. They exchanged a glance before my mom replied, "It's just a storage space, honey. We'll clean it out soon." "But what about the previous owners?" I pressed. "Did they leave anything behind?" My dad shrugged. "We didn't ask too many questions. It's an old house. You know how these things go." Frustrated, I decided to do some digging on my own. I slipped outside and walked down the street to the local library, hoping to find records or stories about the house. The librarian, an elderly woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, helped me navigate the musty archives. "Ah, the old Miller place," she said, her voice laced with nostalgia. "A lot of history there, not all of it good." "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "Rumors of strange happenings," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Footsteps in the night, strange noises, and some say the previous owner went missing." "Missing?" I repeated, my heart racing. "What happened?" The librarian shook her head, as if she didn't want to speak of it. "It's best not to dwell on the past, dear. Some things are better left forgotten." But I couldn't let it go. I needed to know what lay hidden in the attic, and the more I learned, the more I felt drawn to the secrets within. That evening, after my parents went to bed, I made my way back to the attic. My heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. I had to confront whatever was up there. Whatever had been watching me. The door creaked open again, and I stepped inside, flashlight in hand. The air was still, and for a moment I thought maybe it had all been a figment of my imagination. But then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps above me, steady and deliberate. "Who's there?" I called, but my voice echoed back at me, empty and alone. I looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound, but there was nothing in the attic except shadows and dust. I felt a growing sense of dread. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to find the box. I moved toward the corner where I'd found it earlier, but as I reached out, I felt a sudden draft, and the temperature dropped. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and I glanced back toward the staircase. The door to the attic had creaked shut behind me, leaving me in darkness. "Great," I muttered to myself, trying to suppress my rising panic. I turned back toward the box, now more determined than ever to uncover its secrets. The footsteps continued, echoing in a rhythm that seemed almost familiar. I reached the small wooden box, my hands trembling as I touched its surface. It was still locked, but now it felt as if it pulsed with a strange energy. I looked around for something to pry it open, but there was nothing. Then I remembered the old tools I had seen in the far corner of the attic. I hurried over, rummaging through the dust-covered items until I found a rusty screwdriver. With a surge of adrenaline, I returned to the box and began to pry it open. With a final push, the box creaked open, and I gasped at the contents inside. Old photographs spilled out, yellowed with age, depicting families standing proudly in front of the very house I now called home. But it was one photograph that caught my eye. A girl, no older than 10, with dark hair and sad eyes. She stood in the shadows of the house, looking directly at the camera as if she knew something we didn't. "Who are you?" I whispered, feeling an inexplicable connection to the girl. And then, the footsteps stopped. Silence enveloped me, and for a moment I was overwhelmed by a feeling of deep sorrow. I had to know more. I carefully examined the other items in the box, my heart racing with anticipation. Alongside the photographs were scraps of old letters, their ink faded and smudged. I picked up one and began to read, "Dear Evelyn, I fear for our safety. The sounds have grown louder, and I can feel something watching us. I don't know how much longer we can stay here." The name rang a bell, and I glanced back at the photograph. The girl, she must have been Evelyn. What had happened to her? As I continued to read through the letters, it became clear that Evelyn's family had lived in the house long ago, but the letters grew increasingly frantic. They spoke of footsteps in the attic, strange shadows, and an overwhelming sense of dread. They couldn't leave, I realized, a chill running down my spine. They were trapped. Just as I pieced everything together, I heard it again. The sound of footsteps, this time descending the stairs from the attic. My breath caught in my throat. The sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was like someone was pacing back and forth, just out of sight. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. My voice wavered, betraying the fear that gripped me. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and I held my breath, straining to listen. Then, in the silence, I heard a soft whisper, like the wind rustling through the leaves. "Help me." The voice was faint, almost lost in the darkness, but it sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. "Evelyn?" I called out, unsure if I was being foolish. "Is that you?" There was no response, only the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave the attic, to escape whatever presence lingered in the shadows. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn was trying to reach me, to communicate something important. "Tell me what you want," I shouted, frustration boiling over. "Why are you here?" A sudden gust of wind blew through the attic, rattling the boxes and sending dust swirling into the air. I gasped, shielding my eyes, and when I lowered my hand, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of the attic. A shadow flickered, and then it was gone. But in its wake, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a weight lifting, as if a burden had been released. "Please, just show yourself," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. "I want to help you." And then it happened. The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt a presence beside me, cold and unsettling. The figure materialized slowly, revealing itself to be a girl, ethereal and shimmering like a reflection in water. It was Evelyn, her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. "Why are you trapped here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me with an expression that felt like a mixture of fear and longing. "I can't leave. I'm bound to this place. Bound? I echoed, feeling a sense of dread creep in. But why? Evelyn pointed toward the box, her translucent finger trembling. The secrets of this house, they hold me captive. The footsteps you hear, they're my parents, lost in time, searching for me. My heart sank. The letters had hinted at the family's struggles, but this was a deeper sorrow. What happened to you? Fear took us, she replied, her voice a mere whisper. We didn't believe we could escape, and so we remained here, tied to the house. Determined to help Evelyn, I looked back at the box filled with letters and photographs. Maybe if I tell your story, it can set you free, I said, feeling a surge of hope. Evelyn's expression shifted, a glimmer of hope sparking in her eyes. You must uncover the truth. The box holds the key, but you must reveal the story to those who live here. I nodded, resolute. I'll make sure your story is told. I won't let you remain trapped. As I began gathering the letters, I noticed the air around me thickening. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and I could hear the footsteps once more. But this time, they were different. They felt frantic, almost panicked. Please hurry. Evelyn urged, her voice barely above a whisper. Before it's too late. What do you mean? I asked, glancing around the attic, my heart racing. What's going to happen? The house feeds on fear, she explained, her form flickering slightly. If it senses that I'm trying to break free, it will do everything to keep me here. Suddenly, I understood the urgency of the situation. The house was alive in its own way, feeding off the fear it instilled in its occupants. I had to act quickly. With renewed determination, I gathered the letters and photographs, tucking them safely into my backpack. As I turned to face Evelyn, I felt the shadows closing in around me, the footsteps growing louder and more erratic. We have to go, I shouted, adrenaline pumping through my veins. Not yet, she insisted, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. You need to understand what happened to my family. Only then can we break the cycle. I nodded, desperate to understand. Tell me what I need to know. As she began to recount the tale of her family's descent into fear, I could feel the house trembling as if it were alive and aware of our conversation. She spoke of whispers in the night, of their growing paranoia that something was watching them, lurking just beyond the shadows. It started small, she said, her voice filled with pain. Just creaks and groans. But as time passed, it grew worse. My parents stopped trusting each other. They thought I was the cause, that I was drawing the darkness to us. Evelyn, I'm so sorry, I said, feeling the weight of her pain. They tried to leave, she continued, her eyes filling with tears. But the house wouldn't let them. I was scared, so scared, and I didn't know how to make it stop. Just then, a loud crash reverberated through the attic, and I spun around to see boxes flying off the shelves, the wind whipping through the room like a raging storm. Go, Evelyn urged. You have to get out of here. Panic surged through me as the shadows swirled, coiling around my ankles like a living thing. I stumbled toward the staircase, the flashlight flickering as if it were struggling against the darkness. Evelyn, I can't leave you, I shouted, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. You must, she insisted, her voice growing fainter. Tell my story. It's the only way to set me free. I hesitated, torn between the desire to help her and the instinct to save myself. But then I remembered the letters, the desperate plea for understanding. Okay, I promise, I shouted, forcing my legs to move. I sprinted down the stairs, the shadows chasing me, gnashing their teeth as I fled. I burst through the attic door and slammed it shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the house. My heart raced as I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. I made my way to my room, clutching the backpack filled with Evelyn's letters and photographs. The house felt different now, as if the shadows were watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. I needed to tell my parents about what I had discovered, about Evelyn and her family's tragic history. They had to understand the importance of sharing her story. Mom, Dad, I called, my voice echoing through the hall. They came rushing into my room, their expressions filled with concern. What's wrong? My mom asked, worry etched on her face. I found something in the attic, I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. About the family that lived here before us. Their daughter, her name was Evelyn. She needs our help. My dad exchanged a glance with my mom, confusion written on their faces. Slow down, sweetheart. What are you talking about? I opened my backpack and pulled out the letters, laying them out on my bed. They thought they were being watched. The footsteps in the attic, it's all connected. Evelyn is trapped here, and we need to share her story so she can finally be free. My mom knelt beside me, reading the letters with a furrowed brow. My dad looked on, his expression softening as he listened to my frantic explanation. As they absorbed the gravity of my words, I felt a surge of hope. If I could convince them, maybe we could help Evelyn escape her fate. "Why don't we write a letter together?" my mom suggested, her voice steady. "We can tell the story of the Miller family and what happened here. Maybe we can even create a scrapbook or something," my dad added, "to honor Evelyn and her family." I nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over me. Yes, we can make sure their story is told. We spent hours piecing together Evelyn's story, writing about her family, their fears, and ultimately, their loss. As we worked, I could feel the house shifting around us, the oppressive weight of fear beginning to lift. And then, as if the air itself was cleansing, I felt a warmth spreading through the room, as if Evelyn's spirit was watching over us, grateful for the chance to be remembered. The next morning, we placed the scrapbook in a corner of the attic, hoping it would serve as a reminder of Evelyn and her family. The shadows that had once loomed over the house felt lighter, and the whispers that had haunted my nights seemed to fade into silence. As I stood at the foot of the attic stairs, I turned to my parents, a sense of relief washing over me. "I think she's finally at peace." My dad smiled, ruffling my hair. "You did good, kiddo. You helped bring closure to a story that needed to be told." From that day forward, the house felt different. The footsteps in the attic transformed from haunting echoes to memories of a family that once lived there. I knew that Evelyn would always be a part of our home, her story woven into the very fabric of the walls. And as I lay in bed at night, I no longer felt the weight of fear pressing down on me. Instead, I felt a sense of connection to the past, knowing that sometimes all it takes to heal is a voice that is finally heard. Weeks passed, and life in the house returned to normal. The attic, once a source of dread, became a place of reflection, where I often found solace in the memories of Evelyn and her family. One evening, as I settled into bed, I heard a gentle knock on my door. It was my mom, her smile warm as she peeked in. "You okay, honey?" "Yeah," I replied, a content smile spreading across my face. "Just thinking about Evelyn." "I know she's grateful," she said softly, sitting on the edge of my bed. "You did something wonderful for her." As I drifted off to sleep, I heard the faintest sound above me, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like a farewell. I smiled, knowing that the footsteps had finally found peace, and Evelyn's spirit would forever be a part of our home. In the end, we learned that every house has its stories, its whispers, and sometimes, all it takes to bring them to light is a little courage and a lot of heart. Story 5. The night was unusually quiet, an eerie stillness blanketing the town of Ashwood. I had always found comfort in the predictable sounds of life, the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of children, the hum of cars passing by. But tonight, as I stood on my porch gazing up at the sky, I felt a disquieting absence. The stars, usually twinkling like diamonds scattered across a velvet backdrop, were missing. "Strange," I muttered to myself, adjusting the collar of my jacket. "Where are they?" As a child, I had been enamored with stargazing. Each night, I would climb to the rooftop of my house, armed with a telescope, a notebook, and a fierce curiosity. My father would often join me, telling tales of constellations and the legends behind them. But now, standing alone in the dark, I felt an unsettling sense of loss. "Just clouds," I reassured myself, shaking off the unease. I turned to head back inside when a flicker of movement caught my eye. I squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing there, only shadows dancing in the dim light of the street lamp. Shaking my head, I dismissed the feeling of being watched and stepped inside, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my alarm blaring. The usual routine played out: brush my teeth, shower, pour a bowl of cereal, but there was a nagging thought at the back of my mind. The stars. On my way to school, I couldn't shake the image of the empty sky. My best friend Clara noticed my distracted demeanor as we walked to class. "Earth to Ethan. You've been staring at the ground for the past 5 minutes. What's up?" I looked up at her, trying to force a smile. Just thinking about the stars. They were missing last night. Missing? Like, gone? Are you sure you didn't just fall asleep before they came out? Clara teased, nudging my shoulder. I shrugged, still feeling the weight of the previous night's silence. No, I really mean it. It felt different, like something was off. Maybe you just need to get your eyes checked, she laughed, and I couldn't help but chuckle along with her. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Days turned into weeks, and the stars remained absent. The skies, once filled with vibrant constellations, were now shrouded in a thick, oppressive darkness. The townsfolk began to notice, too. Conversations at school shifted from gossip about weekend plans to discussions about the mysterious disappearance of the stars. Do you think it's a sign? Clara asked one day during lunch, her brow furrowed in concern. Like what? An alien invasion? I scoffed, trying to lighten the mood. But as she continued to talk about the theories swirling around town, black holes, cosmic events, even a government cover-up, I found myself drawn deeper into the mystery. That night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I rummaged through the attic, searching for my old telescope. Dust covered everything, and I sneezed as I lifted it from its resting place. I set it up on the roof, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that could explain the missing stars. As I adjusted the lens and aimed it at the sky, I felt a rush of excitement mixed with apprehension. The view was unsettling. Instead of the familiar patterns of stars, the sky appeared as a swirling mass of blackness. Where are you? I whispered to the void, desperation creeping into my voice. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of something unusual, a faint glimmer that flickered like a dying ember. I focused the telescope, my heart racing. What I saw was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. A small, radiant point of light danced in the darkness, pulsing rhythmically. I leaned closer, squinting to get a better view when the light abruptly vanished. No! I gasped, pulling away from the telescope. Had I imagined it? Was I going crazy? The following day, I couldn't shake the image of that fleeting light. It haunted my thoughts, and I found myself wandering through the local library, searching for answers. I scanned the aisles, looking for anything related to astronomy or celestial phenomena. After hours of digging, I stumbled upon a dusty book titled The Lost Stars, Myths and Legends. My heart raced as I flipped through the pages, filled with stories of stars that had vanished from the night sky throughout history. One passage caught my attention. There are tales of stars that have gone missing, swallowed by darkness or stolen by malevolent beings. To reclaim them, one must venture into the heart of the void and confront the shadows. I shivered at the thought. What shadows? Later that evening, I decided to return to the roof. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I set up my telescope once more, determined to uncover the truth behind the vanishing stars. And then, I heard it. A soft whisper carried by the wind, ethereal and haunting. Help us! I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was distant, yet it resonated deep within me. Who's there? I called out, my heart pounding. Silence enveloped me, but the air felt charged, alive with energy. The shadows around me began to shift, coalescing into a figure, a woman cloaked in darkness, her eyes glowing like two distant stars. Help us, she repeated, extending a hand toward me. What do you want? I stammered, taking a cautious step back. The stars are lost, she said, her voice a blend of sorrow and urgency. You must find them before it's too late. My mind raced as I processed her words. But how? Where do I even start? The figure hesitated, her gaze piercing through the darkness. There is a place where the boundaries between worlds blur. You must go there tonight. Where? I asked, desperate for clarity. Follow the whispers, she said before fading into the shadows, leaving me alone on the roof, trembling. I stood frozen, my thoughts swirling like the blackness above me. But one thing was clear. I had to find this place. That night, I packed a small backpack, my telescope, a flashlight, and some snacks, ready for whatever lay ahead. As darkness enveloped Ashwood, I slipped out of my house and followed the whispers, my heart pounding in rhythm with the excitement and fear coursing through me. The moon hung high in the sky, illuminating my path as I ventured into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced in the wind. I followed the whispers, which grew louder with each step. Help us, find us. I quickened my pace, the anticipation tinged with trepidation. The air was thick with a sense of magic, as if something extraordinary awaited me just beyond the trees. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing. In the center stood a massive stone archway, covered in vines and glowing with a soft, pulsating light. It was both beautiful and terrifying. "This must be it," I whispered, stepping closer. As I approached the archway, I could feel the energy emanating from it, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. "Enter," a voice beckoned, and I turned to see the cloaked woman standing beside the archway, her glowing eyes urging me forward. Are you real?" I asked, awed by her presence. "I am the keeper of the lost stars," she replied. "To find them, you must pass through this portal." Taking a deep breath, I stepped through the archway. The world around me shifted, colors swirling like paint on a canvas. I felt weightless, as if I were being pulled into another realm. When I finally landed, I found myself in a realm unlike anything I had ever imagined. The sky was filled with vibrant colors. Pinks, blues, and purples swirled together, illuminating the landscape. But the stars were still absent, their light only a distant memory. "Welcome to the realm of shadows," the woman said, her voice echoing through the vibrant chaos. "Here, you will find the truth about the missing stars." I looked around in wonder, taking in the strange landscapes, twisted trees, glowing flowers, and swirling mists. "What do I need to do?" I asked, feeling a sense of urgency. "Follow the path," she instructed, pointing toward a winding trail that led deeper into the realm. "You will encounter the guardians of the stars. They hold the key to restoring balance." With a nod, I set off down the path, the ground soft beneath my feet. The air was charged with energy, and I could feel the presence of something ancient watching me. After walking for what felt like an eternity, I arrived at a clearing where the first guardian awaited me. A majestic creature, resembling a lion, but with feathers instead of fur, stood proud and fierce. Its eyes glowed like twin moons, radiating wisdom and strength. "Who dares enter my domain?" it roared, its voice deep and rumbling. "I'm Ethan," I stammered, trying to quell my fear. "I'm here to find the missing stars." The guardian regarded me with interest. "Many have come seeking the stars, but few are brave enough to face the truth. What will you sacrifice to restore their light?" I hesitated, uncertainty flooding my mind. "I don't know." "What do you mean?" "To bring the stars back, one must give up something of great value," the guardian replied, its eyes narrowing. "Are you willing to make that sacrifice?" I thought about my life, my family, my dreams. "Yes," I declared, feeling a surge of determination. "I'll do whatever it takes." The guardian nodded solemnly, and with a swift motion, it swept its paw across the ground, revealing a shimmering portal. "Step through, and face your truth." With a deep breath, I stepped through the portal and found myself standing before a massive mirror, its surface swirling like liquid glass. I approached cautiously, my heart racing. As I gazed into the mirror, I was shocked to see not my reflection, but a series of memories. My childhood, my family, my fears, and my regrets. I saw moments of pain and joy, laughter and sorrow, all flickering before me like a film. "Face what you've hidden," a voice echoed around me. "Only then can the stars be restored." I swallowed hard, memories flooding my mind. Times I had turned away from friends, moments of weakness, and fears I had buried deep within. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." Suddenly, the mirror shattered, and the shards transformed into tiny stars, swirling around me. The guardian's voice resonated in my mind. "You have faced your truth. Now, let it guide you." When the stars faded, I found myself back in the clearing, the guardian watching me with approval. "You have shown courage, Ethan. Now you must face the second guardian." Before I could respond, the landscape shifted, and I was transported to a dark cave. The air was thick and heavy, and a sense of dread filled the space. In the shadows, I saw the second guardian, a serpent-like creature, its scales glimmering like jewels. "Who intrudes upon my lair?" it hissed, its voice slithering through the darkness. "I'm Ethan," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm here to restore the stars." The serpent chuckled, a sound like rustling leaves. "Another seeker. What do you bring to appease me?" "I've already sacrificed my fears," I replied, feeling a sense of strength building within me. "What more do you want?" The guardian coiled closer, its gaze piercing. "Only the most genuine sacrifice will suffice." You must give up your deepest desire. I paused, considering the weight of those words. My dreams of becoming an astronomer, of discovering new worlds, was I willing to part with that? I'll do it, I finally said, my heart heavy. I will let go of my dreams if it means bringing back the stars. The serpent's eyes glowed brighter, and it slithered closer. Step forward, and let your desire be known. As I approached the serpent, flames ignited around us, illuminating the cave in a warm glow. Release your desire into the fire, it commanded, and I nodded, feeling a sense of release. I closed my eyes, envisioning my dreams, the long night spent studying the stars, the thrill of discovery. With a deep breath, I released it all into the flames, watching as my hopes turned to embers and floated away. The fire erupted in a brilliant display, and in that moment, I felt both loss and liberation. The serpent regarded me with respect. You have sacrificed greatly, Ethan. You are worthy. The stars shall return. I was transported back to the clearing, my heart racing. The first guardian stood tall, nodding in approval. You have faced the trials and proven your worth. But now you must confront the final guardian, the keeper of light. Before I could respond, the landscape shifted once more, and I found myself standing before a massive, radiant being, its form shimmering like 1,000 stars combined. Welcome, Ethan, the keeper said, its voice like music. You have come far, but to truly restore the stars, you must confront the darkness within yourself. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What darkness? Doubt, regret, the fear of failure, the keeper replied. You must face it head on. The radiant light enveloped me, and I was bombarded by feelings of inadequacy, at the voices that had echoed in my mind for years. You're not good enough. You'll never make it. No, I shouted, struggling against the weight of despair. I won't let you win. With every ounce of strength, I pushed back against the darkness, recalling my journey, the sacrifices I had made, and the truths I had faced. I am not defined by my doubts, I cried out, feeling the light inside me flare brighter. The darkness twisted around me, trying to snuff out my light. You think you can overcome me? You are weak. No, I shouted again, the warmth of hope igniting within me. I am stronger than my fears. I will not let you take my light. With one final push, I embraced my light, letting it surge through me like a tidal wave. The darkness shattered like glass, evaporating into nothingness, and I found myself enveloped in a brilliant glow. The keeper of light smiled, the warmth washing over me. You have conquered your inner darkness, Ethan. You are truly ready to restore the stars. As the light enveloped me, I felt a rush of energy, like a current flowing through my veins. The keeper raised its arms, and a brilliant shower of light erupted from its core, illuminating the realm. Let the stars return, it proclaimed, and in that moment, I felt the world shift around me. The colors of the realm swirled, merging into a kaleidoscope of brilliance as stars began to materialize in the sky above. Each one twinkled to life, filling the darkness with radiant beauty. Look, the keeper exclaimed, gesturing to the sky. The stars are reborn. I gazed up in awe, tears streaming down my face as the stars glittered like jewels against the backdrop of night. The realm was alive with light, and I could feel the energy of the stars resonating within me. With the stars restored, I felt a tugging sensation, as if the universe was calling me home. The keeper smiled at me, its eyes filled with warmth. You have done well, Ethan. Remember this journey and the light within you. Thank you, I whispered, my heart swelling with gratitude. In an instant, I found myself back in the clearing, the first guardian and the serpent standing beside me, their forms shimmering with pride. The stars are returned, the lion said, its voice a deep rumble of satisfaction. Your sacrifices have brought balance back to the universe, the serpent added, its eyes glowing like embers. I nodded, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. I will never forget this. As I stepped through the archway one last time, I felt the warmth of the stars surrounding me. The whispers of the realm faded into the night, leaving only the echoes of hope. I woke the next morning to the sound of birds chirping outside my window. The sun streamed through the curtains, illuminating my room in a warm glow. I rushed outside, heart racing, and looked up at the sky. The stars were back. My heart soared as I gazed up at the twinkling constellations, each one a reminder of my journey and the battles I had faced. I ran to Clara's house, bursting through the door without knocking. Clara, you won't believe what happened, I exclaimed, breathless. She looked up from her breakfast, eyes wide. What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. I found the missing stars. They were gone because of darkness, but I faced my fears and brought them back. Clara's jaw dropped, and she stared at me in disbelief. You're serious? Absolutely. You have to come outside and see. We rushed outside, and as we stood in the sunlight, I recounted my entire adventure. She listened, wide-eyed, hanging on to my every word. It sounds like a dream, she said, still skeptical. But the stars are definitely back. It wasn't a dream, I insisted, my voice filled with conviction. I learned that the light within us can overcome any darkness. We just have to believe in ourselves. As the days turned into weeks, life in Ashwood returned to normal. But I felt different, transformed. The experience had opened my eyes to the beauty of the universe and the power of resilience. I started a stargazing club at school, inviting anyone who wanted to learn about the cosmos. We set up telescopes on the rooftop, spending our nights gazing at the stars, sharing stories and laughter. And every time I looked up at the sky, I remembered the journey I had taken, the sacrifices I had made, and the light that had guided me. The stars twinkled brightly above, each one a testament to hope, strength, and the enduring power of light over darkness. Years later, as I stood beneath the night sky, now a budding astronomer, I often thought back to that fateful night. The journey had shaped me, teaching me lessons I would carry with me forever. I became an advocate for the importance of dreams, encouraging others to face their fears and embrace the light within. The Stargazing Club had transformed into a community, uniting people from all walks of life, and together we spread the message of hope and resilience. The stars shone brighter than ever, a constant reminder of the power of courage and the beauty of our dreams. And as I gazed up at the heavens, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would always have the light within me to guide the way. One quiet night, as I prepared to sleep, I heard a soft whisper on the wind, echoing through the darkness. "Help us." I smiled, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. The stars would always be there, and as long as I believed in the light, I knew that darkness would never truly take hold. And so I drifted into a peaceful sleep, comforted by the twinkling stars above, each one a reminder of the journey I had taken, a journey filled with bravery, sacrifice, and the undeniable power of hope. Story 6. The air was heavy with anticipation as I stood before the old creaking door. It had been nearly a month since I received the mysterious invitation. The envelope had been blank, save for an elegant script that read, "You are invited to the breathing room. Come alone." My curiosity had consumed me. I couldn't resist the allure of the unknown. I hesitated, glancing around the empty street. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. After a deep breath, I pushed the door open, the hinges protesting with a loud creak. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with a thick, musty scent. It felt as if I had stepped into another world. The breathing room was not what I expected. Instead of a comfortable gathering place, it felt like a living entity. The walls seemed to pulse, as if they were breathing. I glanced around, noting the strange decor. Faded tapestries adorned the walls, and the furniture was old but ornate. It felt like stepping into a forgotten era, yet everything was disturbingly pristine. "Welcome," a voice floated through the air, smooth yet eerie. I turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows. The person was dressed in an elegant suit, their face obscured by the low light. "I'm glad you could make it," they continued, a smile playing on their lips. "This is a place for the curious, the seekers of truth. Are you ready to discover what lies beyond?" I felt a chill run down my spine, but nodded, captivated by their charisma. "What do you mean by beyond?" "Tonight, we explore the depths of our minds," they said, gesturing to a group of people seated in a circle. Each individual had a unique aura, their expressions a mix of eagerness and apprehension. "Join us, and let the breathing room guide you." As I settled into my seat, the atmosphere shifted. A warm breeze swept through the room, wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. I felt an inexplicable connection to everyone present, as if our souls were intertwined. The figure introduced themselves as the curator, the one responsible for leading the exploration. They explained the purpose of the gathering, to confront our inner demons and unlock the potential hidden within our fears. The first step is to confront your fear, the curator declared, their voice resonating in the room. We will begin with a simple exercise. I want each of you to close your eyes and visualize your greatest fear. Let it come to the surface. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart racing. What was my greatest fear? As images flooded my mind, I saw myself standing alone in a vast emptiness, surrounded by nothingness. The feeling of isolation clawed at me, and I gasped, struggling to breathe. The atmosphere shifted, and I felt a presence beside me, a cold hand resting on my shoulder. I opened my eyes to find the room transformed. The walls shimmered like water, and shadows danced along the edges. Suddenly a figure emerged from the shadows, a dark silhouette that seemed to absorb the light. Panic surged through me. "What are you?" I whispered, backing away. "I am your fear," it replied, its voice a haunting echo. "You cannot escape me. You must face me if you wish to move forward." The curator's voice cut through the tension. "Breathe, Ethan. Acknowledge your fear. It is a part of you." With a deep breath, I turned to face the figure. "I know you," I said, my voice shaking. "You're the darkness that follows me, the doubt that haunts my thoughts." The figure nodded, its form shifting like smoke. "Accept me, and I will reveal my truth." As I embraced the figure, the room began to swirl. Images flooded my mind, moments of failure, regret, and heartbreak. I felt each one like a weight pressing down on my chest. But then, a light emerged from the darkness, illuminating the shadows. "I see you now," I said, my voice steadying. "You are a part of my journey. I can't hide from you anymore." The figure smiled, transforming into a mirror that reflected my own face. "Only by acknowledging your fears can you learn from them." With a surge of understanding, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The darkness faded, leaving behind a newfound clarity. The atmosphere shifted again as the curator clapped their hands, bringing everyone back to the present moment. "Well done, Ethan. Now let's take this further. The next exercise involves confronting your desires, the things you long for but fear you may never achieve." I sat back, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. I had always wanted to be a writer, but self-doubt had held me back. "Close your eyes once more," the curator instructed. "Envision your deepest desire. Let it take form." As I closed my eyes, I pictured a room filled with books, my books. The scent of paper and ink surrounded me, and I could hear the faint sound of pages turning. But then doubt crept in, whispering that I wasn't good enough, that I would never succeed. "Let your desire fight against the doubt," the curator encouraged. I felt a surge of anger and frustration as I faced the doubt. "No, I will not let you control me," I shouted, my voice echoing in the room. The shadows began to swirl, forming into a figure that resembled me, but was cloaked in darkness. "You can't escape me," it sneered. "You are not a writer. You'll fail." I clenched my fists, determination flooding my veins. "You are not the truth. You are a lie I refuse to believe." With every ounce of strength, I charged at the figure, forcing it to confront the light within me. The darkness began to shatter, replaced by the glowing essence of my dreams. As the figure dissolved, I felt a wave of energy wash over me. I opened my eyes to find the room aglow with vibrant light. Everyone around me wore expressions of awe, their own fears and desires now intertwined in the atmosphere. "You have all faced your truths tonight," the curator said, their voice filled with pride. "But there is one final lesson to learn: the power of connection." I looked around, realizing how the experiences had woven us together. The breathing room was not just a physical space, but a sanctuary for our collective growth. "The final exercise requires vulnerability," the curator continued. "Share your truth with one another. Let your voices echo in this room, for in connection lies the strength to overcome." I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the room envelop me. "I am afraid I won't achieve my dreams," I confessed, "but I am willing to fight for them." One by one, others shared their fears and desires, creating a tapestry of emotions that filled the air. Laughter and tears blended together, forming a bond that transcended our individual struggles. As the night progressed, I felt lighter, freer. Each story shared was like a breath of fresh air, nourishing our spirits. The breathing room was alive with energy, and I could feel the transformative power of our collective vulnerability. The curator looked around, a satisfied smile on their face. "Tonight, you have all taken a step toward healing. Remember this bond: for it will guide you in your darkest moments. As the gathering drew to a close, I felt a sense of bittersweet farewell. I had discovered so much about myself and forged connections that I knew would last beyond the walls of the breathing room. The curator approached me, their expression sincere. "You have a gift, Ethan. Don't let fear hold you back. Your voice deserves to be heard." "I won't," I promised, feeling a surge of determination. "I will write my truth." As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I glanced back at the breathing room. The lights flickered like stars, and I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. I had entered as a seeker, but I was leaving as a warrior, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. The days turned into weeks, and I felt a profound change within me. I began to write again, pouring my heart onto the page with renewed vigor. Each word became a declaration of my truth, a testament to the journey I had undertaken. The bond I formed with the others in the breathing room remained strong. We began meeting regularly, sharing our stories and supporting each other in our pursuits. The laughter and encouragement felt like a warm embrace, reminding me that I was never alone. One evening, as I sat at my desk, I glanced at the blank page before me. It felt both daunting and exhilarating. I took a deep breath, recalling the atmosphere of the breathing room, the warmth of connection, and the power of truth. With my heart racing, I began to write. Words flowed from my fingertips, each sentence a step toward my dreams. The story unfolded like a tapestry, rich with emotion and depth. However, as I delved deeper into my writing, shadows of doubt began to creep back in. I would find myself staring at the page, paralyzed by fear of inadequacy. What if it's not good enough? I would think, the echoes of the dark figure haunting my mind. One night, as I sat alone in my room, the shadows gathered around me, whispering insidiously, "You're wasting your time. You'll never be a writer." I felt the familiar grip of despair tightening around my chest. But then I remembered the breathing room, the warmth, the connection. I closed my eyes, allowing the memories to flood my mind. "I will not let you control me," I shouted into the darkness. "I am more than my fears." The shadows recoiled, flickering like candle flames. I focused on the light within, the spark ignited by my experiences. "I will embrace my truth. I am a writer." With each declaration, the shadows faded, replaced by a radiant glow. I felt empowered, my spirit rising with every breath. In the following weeks, I continued to write, pouring my heart into the stories I crafted. Each page became a reflection of my journey, a celebration of resilience and hope. I reached out to my newfound friends, sharing my progress and seeking their feedback. The support was overwhelming, each message reinforcing my belief in myself. The more I shared, the stronger I felt. Months passed, and as I stood at my desk, a sense of nostalgia washed over me. I decided to revisit the breathing room, to share my journey with the curator and the others. When I arrived, the atmosphere was as vibrant as I remembered. I was greeted with warm smiles and excited chatter. "Ethan!" the curator exclaimed, their eyes sparkling with joy. "We've missed you." "I've missed you all too," I replied, feeling a rush of gratitude. "I have so much to share." As we settled into the familiar circle, I recounted my journey, my struggles with doubt, the power of connection, and how the breathing room had transformed my life. My words resonated deeply, sparking a lively discussion among everyone. "The power of vulnerability is incredible," one person said. "It's amazing how sharing our fears can bring us closer." Another added, "And it's the support of this community that keeps us strong." I felt a sense of belonging, the warmth of our shared experiences enveloping me. The breathing room had become a sanctuary for our collective growth. As the night drew to a close, the curator stood up, their presence commanding attention. "Tonight, we celebrate not just our individual journeys, but the legacy of the breathing room. Together, we have created a space where truth thrives and connection flourishes." I looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight, a sense of peace washing over me. I realized that the breathing room was more than just a physical space. It was a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of community. In the weeks that followed, I continued to write, fueled by the support of my friends and the lessons I had learned. Each story became a tribute to the journey we had undertaken together. The breathing room remained a constant source of inspiration. It taught me that fear is not something to be conquered but embraced, and that connection with others can light the way through even the darkest of times. And as I gazed up at the stars one night, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had led me here. The breathing room was a part of me, a sacred space where dreams took flight, and I knew that I would carry its lessons in my heart forever. Story 7. It was a rainy afternoon when I first stepped into the old town library. I had just moved to this quaint, sleepy town, seeking solace after a tumultuous year. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and aged paper, wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through the tall, stained glass windows, illuminating rows of books that seemed to whisper stories of their own. As I wandered through the narrow aisles, I felt a strange connection to the place. It was both eerily quiet and alive with whispers, as if the books themselves were urging me to uncover their secrets. I had always been drawn to stories, finding comfort in the pages that offered an escape from reality. But little did I know, I was about to find a story that would change everything. I approached the front desk, where a woman in her 60s sat, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up, her blue eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Welcome to the Crestwood Library. What brings you here?" "I just moved to town," I replied, glancing around at the towering shelves. "I'm looking for a place to read and maybe get lost in some stories." She smiled knowingly. "You've come to the right place. This library has a history, a rich tapestry of tales woven into its very walls. You might even encounter a ghost or two." I chuckled, thinking she was joking. "A ghost? Really?" "Oh yes," she replied, leaning closer as if sharing a secret. "They say the spirit of a young girl haunts these halls. She loved to read and never quite left. Many have claimed to see her wandering between the shelves." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. "What's her story?" The librarian sighed, her expression turning somber. "Her name was Lily. She was a bright young girl with a passion for books. She vanished one stormy night many years ago, and though her body was never found, her spirit is said to linger here, searching for something." I felt a chill run down my spine, but it was more excitement than fear. "What is she searching for?" "Some say it's her lost book. Others believe she seeks closure for her untimely departure, but no one knows for sure." After my conversation with the librarian, I decided to explore the library further. I found a cozy nook with a worn leather armchair and a small table piled high with books. Settling into the chair, I pulled a novel from the stack and opened it, but my mind was elsewhere. Images of Lily flashed through my thoughts, her curiosity, her love for stories, and the mystery surrounding her disappearance. What could have happened to her? I felt an odd sense of connection, as if our stories were intertwined. Hours slipped by as I read, and when I finally looked up, the library was eerily quiet. The sunlight had faded, casting shadows that seemed to stretch toward me like dark fingers. I shivered, but brushed it off, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a soft rustling sound behind me. I turned, expecting to see the librarian, but the aisle was empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing softly in the silence. No response. I shook my head, chuckling nervously at myself. Get a grip, it's just an old library. As I gathered my things, I felt a sudden cold breeze wash over me, making me pause. I glanced over my shoulder again, and my heart raced as I caught a glimpse of a figure, a girl in a white dress, her hair cascading down her back. She stood at the far end of the aisle, staring at me with wide, sorrowful eyes. "Lily?" I whispered, half hoping it was just a trick of the light. The figure tilted her head slightly, and as if inviting me to follow her. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my curiosity held me in place. I took a hesitant step forward, and she vanished into thin air. That night, I lay in bed, the image of the ghostly girl etched in my mind. Sleep evaded me as I pondered the mysteries of the library and the lost spirit of Lily. Why had she appeared to me? What was she trying to convey? In the morning, I decided to dig deeper. After breakfast, I returned to the library, determined to uncover the truth behind the ghost story. I approached the librarian again, ready to ask more questions. "Did you see her?" she asked, her eyes wide with intrigue. "I think I did," I replied, my heart racing. She was there, and she looked at me. The librarian nodded, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Perhaps she sees you as someone who can help her. Many have felt her presence, but few have ventured to understand her story. What can you tell me about her disappearance? I asked, desperate for answers. She led me to a small, dimly lit section of the library where old newspapers were stored. Here, you'll find articles about the town's history. Lily's story is buried within these pages. As I pored over the brittle, yellowed clippings, I discovered the tragic tale of Lily Thompson. She had been a bright, imaginative girl who often spent her afternoons in the library. One fateful night, she vanished without a trace during a storm. Despite extensive searches, no one had ever found her, and the mystery of her disappearance lingered like a ghost in the town's history. Days turned into weeks, and my obsession with Lily's story deepened. I began visiting the library every day, digging into archives and connecting with locals who had known her. I learned that she had been a beloved child in the community, her laughter echoing in the halls of the library, brightening the lives of everyone she encountered. One rainy afternoon, as I sat in my favorite armchair, I felt a familiar chill sweep over me. The atmosphere grew heavy, and I sensed Lily's presence once more. "Lily, if you can hear me, I want to help you," I whispered, my heart pounding. To my astonishment, a book slid off the shelf and landed at my feet. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The cover was worn, and the title read, "The Lost Adventures." As I opened it, I found a collection of stories written by children, each one filled with imagination and wonder. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I stumbled upon a drawing. It was a sketch of the library, but there was something else. An image of a small girl in a white dress standing beneath the grand staircase, her face filled with hope and longing. "This is you, isn't it?" I murmured, looking around the empty room. "You were looking for something." The air thickened, and I felt a warmth surround me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this book held the key to understanding Lily's fate. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent hours studying the stories within the book. Each tale was a glimpse into the lives of the children who had frequented the library, and I began to sense a pattern, a recurring theme of lost things and unfulfilled dreams. As I pieced together the stories, I realized that they were more than just tales. They were messages. It became clear that Lily had poured her heart into these pages, expressing her hopes, dreams, and fears through her writing. But there was a deeper connection, a longing for something that had slipped through her fingers. I began to feel a bond with her, as if we were kindred spirits united by our love for stories. "What do you want me to find, Lily?" I whispered into the silence, my heart aching with empathy for the lost girl. That evening, as the library closed, I returned to the section where I had first encountered Lily. I stood beneath the grand staircase, the air thick with anticipation. "I'm here," I said softly. "Show me what you need me to see." The shadows flickered, and for a brief moment I thought I saw her, a glimmer of white amidst the darkness. A bookcase creaked, drawing my attention. I approached it cautiously, running my fingers along the spines of the books until one felt oddly warm to the touch. I pulled it free, revealing a hidden compartment behind the shelf. My heart raced as I pried it open, and there, nestled within the dust, was a small, leather-bound diary. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing pages filled with Lily's delicate handwriting. The diary chronicled Lily's life, the joys of childhood, her dreams of becoming a writer, and the day of her disappearance. The entries were filled with innocent hope, but as I read further, a sense of dread began to creep in. In her final entry, she wrote about feeling trapped, both in her life and in the library. "I want to escape," she penned. "I want to live the adventures I read about. I want to be free." Tears prickled at my eyes as I realized the weight of her words. Lily hadn't just disappeared. She had been searching for freedom, for a way to break free from the confines of her life. But the storm that night had swept her away, leaving her spirit trapped within the walls of the library. "I'm so sorry, Lily," I whispered, my heart aching for the girl who had longed for adventure, but had been lost in the shadows. Suddenly the temperature dropped, and I felt a presence beside me. The air crackled with energy, and I sensed Lily's spirit enveloping me, a wave of emotion flooding my senses. I could feel her gratitude, her yearning for closure, and her need to be heard. "I will help you find your freedom." I vowed, my voice steady with determination. "I will tell your story." With newfound resolve, I began to write. Inspired by Lily's diary, I poured my heart into a narrative that intertwined our lives. I wrote of her dreams, her fears, and the mystery of her disappearance, ensuring that her story would not be forgotten. I reached out to the library's community, organizing an event to share my findings. Flyers adorned the town, inviting everyone to gather and celebrate the legacy of a girl who had touched so many lives. The night of the event, the library buzzed with excitement. Familiar faces filled the aisles, and I felt a surge of nervousness as I prepared to speak. Would they understand the significance of Lily's story? Would they feel the connection I had found? As I stood before the crowd, I shared Lily's tale, weaving in the themes of adventure, dreams, and the importance of being heard. The audience listened intently, captivated by the narrative that unfolded before them. When I finished, a hushed silence fell over the room, followed by a wave of applause. Tears glistened in the eyes of many as they recognized the impact of Lily's story, a reminder of the dreams that lay buried within each of us. In the days that followed, the town came together to honor Lily's memory. A small memorial was established in the library, featuring her diary and the stories of other children who had frequented the library. It became a space of reflection and inspiration, a place where dreams could be shared and nurtured. As I walked through the library, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that Lily's spirit had found solace, her voice finally heard after so many years of silence. The library had become a sanctuary of connection, a reminder that we are never truly alone in our struggles. One evening, as I sat in the cozy nook with a book in hand, I felt a gentle breeze caress my cheek. A warmth enveloped me, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw a flicker of light, a soft smile in the shadows. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a rush of gratitude for the girl who had brought me here. I had not only uncovered her story, but had also found my own path amidst the whispers of the past. With each passing day, the library became a second home for me. I continued to write, inspired by the stories that surrounded me. The connection I had formed with Lily motivated me to explore new themes and delve deeper into the realms of imagination. I began to host writing workshops at the library, inviting others to share their stories and dreams. The spirit of collaboration ignited a creative spark within the community, and soon the library buzzed with excitement and inspiration. One night, as I was closing up, I paused to glance at the memorial dedicated to Lily. The flickering candles cast a warm glow, illuminating the diary that had once held her secrets. I ran my fingers over the pages, feeling a connection that transcended time. "Your story will live on," I promised, knowing that our experiences, though separated by years, had forged an unbreakable bond. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I gazed up at the stars twinkling in the sky. I felt a sense of purpose, a realization that every story, including my own, had the power to touch lives and create lasting connections. Years passed, and the library continued to flourish as a hub of creativity and inspiration. My connection to Lily remained a guiding force in my life, reminding me of the importance of sharing our dreams and supporting one another in our journeys. One evening, as I stood in the library surrounded by friends and fellow writers, I reflected on how far I had come. The library, once a place of solitude, had become a vibrant community, a living testament to the power of stories and the bonds we form. As I shared my latest work with the group, I felt a warm presence beside me. In that moment, I knew that Lily was still with me, her spirit woven into the fabric of our stories, guiding us all toward our dreams. Story 8. It was a typical Wednesday night, the kind that melds seamlessly into the next day. The clock on the wall ticked away, echoing the rhythmic pulse of my solitude. I sat in my small living room, draped in a blanket and wrapped in a cocoon of warmth. Outside, the wind howled, sending shivers through the trees and rattling the windows. It was just another night of binge-watching my favorite show, a comforting escape from the chaotic world outside. As I reached for my phone to check the time, a sudden chill crept up my spine. The house was still. Too still. I brushed it off as the remnants of the chilly breeze that seeped through the cracks of the old window frames. With a huff, I settled deeper into my couch, determined to ignore the creeping unease gnawing at my thoughts. The phone vibrated beside me, breaking the silence like a gunshot in a quiet room. I glanced at the screen. It was just a notification for an app. As I silenced it and returned to my show, the feeling of unease intensified. I couldn't shake the thought that I wasn't alone, even though I knew I was. A few hours later, as I prepared for bed, the phone rang. The time was just past midnight. My heart raced as I picked up the device, seeing a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, a lump forming in my throat. Something about that number felt ominous. "Hello?" I said cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "Is this Emma?" A voice crackled through the line. It was low and raspy, sending chills down my spine. "Yes, who is this?" I asked, my heart thudding in my chest. There was a moment of silence, and I could hear faint breathing on the other end. "I'm just calling to check on you, Emma. Are you alone?" Panic surged through me. I didn't recognize the voice, but there was something unsettling about it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Who are you? How did you get my number?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know everything about you," the voice said, its tone dripping with malice. "You should really lock your doors, Emma. It's dangerous to be alone at night." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Who are you?" I repeated, my voice shaking now. "Just someone who cares," the voice replied. "But it's almost too late for you." Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving me in a deafening silence. I stared at the phone, heart racing and adrenaline coursing through my veins. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a gazelle caught in the predator's gaze. My mind raced as I dialed the police, fingers trembling as I recounted the call. The officer assured me they would look into it, but emphasized that it could just be a prank. "Don't worry, ma'am. People call in the middle of the night for all sorts of reasons. Just stay inside and lock your doors," he advised. After hanging up, I turned on every light in the house, but the sense of dread lingered like a heavy fog. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, reassuring myself that I was safe. Yet sleep eluded me, and I lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the night. Around 3 a.m., the phone rang again, a shrill sound that pierced the stillness. My heart raced as I grabbed it, half expecting the same voice. This time, it was a different number, but I hesitated, fear paralyzing me. After a moment, curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Emma," the voice said again, but this time it was softer, almost sweet. "I told you to lock your doors." "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" "You'll find out soon enough," the voice said before hanging up. I tossed my phone aside and bolted upright, my heart pounding against my ribcage. The walls of my room felt like they were closing in, and I could almost hear the echoes of the voice bouncing around my head. Desperate to escape the confines of my own mind, I stumbled into the living room and grabbed a blanket, wrapping it tightly around myself. The following days dragged on, each hour feeling heavier than the last. I hadn't slept much since the first call, paranoia creeping in like a thief in the night. I kept the curtains drawn, fearing that any glimpse of the outside world would reveal a lurking figure. I took to locking myself in, creating a fortress of safety around me. I avoided social interactions, terrified that the caller might be watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Friends texted and called, but I ignored them, retreating further into my shell. One afternoon, while I sat on the couch, the sunlight streaming through the windows, I received a text from an unknown number. My heart raced as I read the message. "I see you, Emma. You can't hide forever." My breath caught in my throat, panic setting in as I looked around the room, convinced someone was watching from the shadows. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, and I was losing my grip on reality. Desperate for help, I finally reached out to my friend Sarah, who had been trying to check in on me. I texted her, "I need to talk. Can you come over?" She arrived within the hour, her expression a mix of concern and confusion. "What's going on, Emma? You've been MIA, she said, looking around my dimly lit living room. "I've been getting these calls," I confessed, my voice trembling, "and texts. I feel like someone's watching me." Her brow furrowed as she listened, and I could see the concern growing in her eyes. "Have you thought about reporting it again? Maybe they can trace the calls?" I did, But they said it might just be a prank, I said, feeling defeated. I don't know what to do. Let's go to the police together, she suggested, her voice firm. You can't handle this alone. With a nod, I grabbed my coat and we headed out, the weight of the world lifting slightly off my shoulders. Perhaps together we could find a solution. When we arrived at the police station, I felt a mix of hope and dread. I recounted the story to the officer on duty, my hands shaking as I spoke. He listened patiently, taking notes as I detailed the calls, the messages, and the sense of fear that had enveloped my life. Have you considered that it could be someone you know? The officer asked, raising an eyebrow. I don't think so, I replied, shaking my head. It feels different, like they know too much about me. The officer assured me they would investigate further and urged me to keep a record of any future communications. As we left, I felt a flicker of hope, but couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. That night, as I tried to sleep, I was hyper-aware of every sound, the creaking floorboards, the whisper of the wind against the windows. I closed my eyes, desperate for rest, but sleep eluded me. Just past midnight, the phone rang again. I sat up, heart racing as I stared at the screen. The number was familiar, my caller. I hesitated, fear coursing through my veins, but something compelled me to answer. Emma. The voice crooned, a sickly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. Did you think I'd give up so easily? What do you want? I shouted, my voice trembling. Leave me alone. I want to play a little game, the voice replied, the tone turning sinister. You have until dawn to figure out my identity. If you don't, I'll come for you. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What are you talking about? I whispered, feeling the weight of fear constrict my throat. Good luck, Emma. Time is running out. The line went dead. Panic surged through me as I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I grabbed my laptop and began frantically searching for information. I scoured social media, trying to find anyone who might have a grudge against me, but came up empty-handed. The walls of my room felt like they were closing in, the shadows creeping closer. I called Sarah, my voice trembling as I explained the latest threat. I don't know what to do. I can't stay here alone. Come to my place, she urged. We'll figure this out together. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I nodded, feeling a rush of relief. With a racing heart, I gathered a few essentials and slipped out of my house, locking the door behind me. The night air felt heavy, and the darkness loomed like a suffocating blanket. When I arrived at Sarah's, I felt a semblance of safety wash over me. We locked the doors and settled into her living room, surrounded by familiar comforts. We talked late into the night, brainstorming possibilities and trying to distract ourselves from the nightmare that had become my reality. Just as I started to feel relaxed, my phone buzzed again. I hesitated, dread filling my stomach as I looked at the screen. A new text appeared. You can't hide forever, Emma. I'll always find you. I tossed my phone aside, tears of frustration welling in my eyes. Why is this happening to me? I cried, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me. Let's not give in to fear, Sarah said firmly, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. We'll figure this out. But even as she spoke, I could see the worry etched on her face, the way her eyes darted toward the windows as if expecting to see a shadow lurking outside. As dawn approached, we concocted a plan to confront the caller. I would go through my contacts, reach out to anyone who could help, while Sarah would stay by my side, providing support and strength. I scrolled through my phone, thinking of anyone who might have the skills to help track the calls or even provide some insight into the strange situation. But as I reached the end of my contact list, a sinking feeling gripped me. No one stood out. No names brought clarity to the chaos. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging us into darkness for a brief moment. My heart raced as I grasped Sarah's hand tightly. What was that? I whispered, fear creeping back in. Probably just a power surge, she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Just then, my phone buzzed once more. This time it was a call. The familiar number stared back at me, and I froze, fear coursing through my veins. Answer it, Sarah urged, her eyes wide with apprehension. We need to know who this is. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Okay, but stay close, I replied. I answered the call, my voice trembling. What do you want from me? I demanded, trying to project strength despite the fear gnawing at my insides. Emma, I'm right outside, the voice said, chilling my blood. Look out your window. I swallowed hard, glancing toward the curtain. My heart raced as I took slow, deliberate steps to the window. With trembling hands, I pulled back the fabric and peered outside. At first, I saw nothing but the empty street. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I caught sight of a figure standing in the shadows, just beyond the streetlight's reach. A tall silhouette, obscured by the night, watching. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt the weight of fear press down on me. "Who are you?" I screamed, my voice laced with panic. "What do you want from me?" "Your fear, Emma. It's delicious," the voice replied, the laughter echoing ominously through the phone. Without thinking, I dropped the phone and bolted away from the window. "Sarah, we need to hide," I cried, my heart pounding in my chest. We rushed to the back of the house, seeking refuge in the kitchen. As we huddled behind the counter, I could hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. The air felt heavy, thick with dread as we listened intently, breaths held in silence. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, panic evident in her voice. "We wait," I replied, trying to muster strength. "We can't let them know we're scared." The footsteps grew louder, and I could feel the tension in the air, electric and suffocating. It felt like time had stopped, and in that moment, I was acutely aware of every creak of the house, every rustle of fabric. Just as I thought we might be safe, the front door swung open with a loud crash, reverberating through the silence. I jumped, my heart racing as I clutched Sarah's arm. "Emma," the voice called out, deeper now, laced with amusement. Come out, wherever you are." I felt a cold wave of terror wash over me. "They're here," I hissed, pulling Sarah toward the back door. We slipped out into the backyard, the cool air hitting my face like a splash of ice water. Panic surged as we made our way toward the fence, desperate to escape the nightmare that was unfolding. "Where do we go?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Over the fence," I urged, scrambling up and helping her over. We landed with a thud on the other side, the grass cool against my skin. We dashed across the yard, heading for the nearest house. I pounded on the door, desperation surging within me. After a few agonizing moments, the door swung open, revealing a kind-faced elderly woman. "What's going on?" she asked, concern flooding her features. "Please, we need help," I gasped, dragging Sarah inside and closing the door behind us. The woman's husband appeared, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's happening?" "Someone is after us," Sarah explained, trying to catch her breath. "They've been calling and watching us." The couple exchanged worried glances, and the man moved to the window, peering outside. "We should call the police," he said, glancing back at us. I nodded vigorously, the thought of the police bringing a flicker of hope. As he dialed, I could feel the tension slowly easing. Maybe we were finally safe. After what felt like an eternity, the police arrived. They listened to our story, taking notes and assuring us they would handle the situation. The elderly couple offered us comfort, providing blankets and hot tea as we waited for updates. Eventually, an officer approached, a grave expression on his face. "We've searched the area, but there's no sign of anyone," he said. "However, we'll keep an eye out and patrol the area. If you see anything suspicious, don't hesitate to call." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. As we returned to Sarah's house, I knew the terror wasn't over yet, but we had taken a step toward safety. In the days that followed, I stayed with Sarah, my phone glued to my side as we avoided solitude. I had reported the calls to the police multiple times, but there were no updates, no leads. The paranoia hung heavy in the air, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. But in the midst of fear, something shifted within me. I began to reclaim my life, no longer allowing the unknown to control my every thought. I sought therapy, reaching out for support and understanding, slowly unraveling the grip that fear had on me. Weeks passed, and as the nights turned into days, I began to heal. I found strength in vulnerability, opening up to friends and family about my experience. I realized I was not alone. Others had faced similar nightmares and emerged stronger on the other side. One evening, as I sat with Sarah on her porch, I gazed up at the stars, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I could finally breathe, the weight of the past beginning to lift. "I feel like I can finally move forward," I confessed, a smile breaking through the remnants of fear. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said, her eyes shining with warmth. "You're stronger than you think." Months later, I received a call from the police. They had traced the calls to a number connected to a local man with a history of harassment. I felt a rush of emotions, a mix of relief and anger. He had terrorized me, but now there was closure. The police assured me they would handle the situation, and with that, I finally felt free. I had faced my fears, and they no longer held power over me. As the sun rose on a new day, I stood at my window, gazing out at the world beyond. The storm that had once clouded my life had passed, leaving behind a vibrant landscape filled with possibility. I had learned that fear could be a powerful adversary, but so could resilience. With the support of friends and family, I emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The midnight caller had come and gone, but in their wake, they had unknowingly gifted me the courage to reclaim my life. The darkness may have lingered for a time, but now with every sunrise, I welcomed the light. Story 9. The sun was setting as I made my way home from work, the golden light casting long shadows on the pavement. I had just moved to this small town, seeking a fresh start away from the chaos of the city. As I walked through the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, as if the town held secrets just beneath the surface. On my way home, I stumbled upon an old house that stood at the end of a narrow alley. It was a decrepit building, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. But what caught my attention was the door, a vibrant red that stood out against the muted colors of the house. It seemed out of place, almost unnatural, like a warning sign begging to be ignored. Curiosity tugged at me, and I found myself drawn closer. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated, heart racing at the thought of stepping inside. I glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, then pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. As I stepped inside, I was greeted by a musty smell, the air thick with dust. The interior was dimly lit, sunlight filtering through the grime-covered windows. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the scene. Faded wallpaper, scattered debris, and a layer of dust that spoke of years of neglect. I wandered through the narrow hallway, glancing into empty rooms that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. Each step felt like an intrusion, as if I were trespassing on sacred ground. My footsteps echoed in the silence, heightening my awareness of the house's eerie presence. Suddenly I heard a soft rustle behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but found only shadows dancing in the corners of the room. I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of the light. I had to leave, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I made my way to the end of the hallway where the red door loomed larger than life. It was impossible to ignore, a siren call beckoning me closer. I hesitated for a moment, dread pooling in my stomach, but curiosity won out. With a deep breath, I grasped the handle and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was empty except for a single chair in the center and a dusty mirror hanging on the wall. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. As I stepped inside, I felt an overwhelming urge to sit in the chair, as if it held some kind of power. But before I could move, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. A fleeting shadow that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. I blinked, convinced it was just my imagination, but the feeling of unease intensified. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room. Panic surged through me as I rattled the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. I felt the walls closing in, suffocating me with their oppressive energy. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in front of me. I glanced around the room, searching for an escape. The mirror caught my attention again, and I approached it, desperate for a distraction from my growing fear. As I looked into the glass, I felt a strange pull, as if it were alive and beckoning me closer. Suddenly, the reflection shifted, and I saw a figure standing behind me, a tall, dark silhouette with empty eyes. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My heart raced as I realized I was not alone. The sense of dread deepened as I turned back to the mirror, knowing I had to confront whatever was lurking. In the reflection, the figure began to take shape, revealing a woman with hollow cheeks and a sorrowful expression. She reached out, her hand pressing against the glass as if trying to break free. I felt a chill run down my spine, my instincts screaming at me to run. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, fear gripping my throat. "I am trapped," she replied, her voice filled with despair. "You must help me escape this place." I backed away from the mirror, my heart racing. "How do I help you?" I asked, terrified yet intrigued. "Find the key," she urged, her eyes pleading. "It's the only way." Determined to find the key, I searched the small room, rifling through dusty remnants of the past. My hands trembled as I opened drawers and cabinets, each creak of wood echoing my anxiety. Minutes turned into hours as I tore through the room, my desperation growing. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away, that something sinister was watching me from the shadows. Finally, I stumbled upon a small box hidden beneath the floorboards. My heart raced as I pried it open, revealing an old, rusty key. It felt heavy in my hand, imbued with a sense of significance. With renewed hope, I turned to the door, but my heart sank when I saw the mirror again. The woman's reflection had changed. She was now screaming, her face twisted in agony. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, but I steeled myself, determined to break the cycle. I inserted the key into the door's lock, my hands shaking as I turned it. The door creaked open, and I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. But the house felt different now, darker, more foreboding. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could sense something following me. I sprinted through the hallway, the shadows closing in as I neared the exit. Just as I reached the front door, I heard a voice call out from behind me. "You can't leave." I hesitated, heart pounding. I glanced back at the hallway, the red door standing ominously at the end. The figure of the woman loomed, her face twisted in rage. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, fear fueling my resolve. "I need you to stay," she hissed, her voice echoing in the stillness. "You belong to me now." With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I flung open the front door and dashed into the night. I could feel the woman's presence behind me, a chilling force that urged me to turn back, but I refused to succumb to her power. I ran through the streets, the cool night air biting at my skin. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment, locking the door behind me. My heart raced as I leaned against the door, gasping for breath. But even as I sought refuge, I could still feel the woman's presence lingering, an echo of despair that haunted my thoughts. I couldn't escape the feeling that the house and the red door were somehow tied to me now, that I had become a part of its dark history. Days turned into weeks and life began to return to normal, but the memory of that night haunted me. I could still hear the whispers of the woman in my dreams, her voice a constant reminder of my encounter with the unknown. I tried to put it behind me, but the nightmares grew worse. I saw the red door in my sleep, and the woman's face appeared, twisted in anguish. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, feeling her presence even in the light of day. One night, while trying to distract myself, I revisited the alley where the house stood. I felt an inexplicable pull, as if the red door was calling me back. The moment I laid eyes on the house, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I stood before the red door, heart racing. It was time to confront whatever darkness awaited me inside. I had come too far to let fear dictate my life. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open once more. Inside, the air was thick with tension, and the atmosphere felt charged. I moved through the familiar rooms, drawn back to the mirror in the small room. As I approached it, the woman's reflection appeared once more, her face twisted with desperation. "Why won't you help me?" she pleaded, her voice echoing in my mind. "I want to help," I replied, fear mingling with determination. "But how?" "You must face the truth," she whispered, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Only then will I be free." As I looked into the mirror, I felt a rush of emotions flooding my mind. I saw flashes of her life, moments of joy, sorrow, and despair. I realized she was not just a spirit. She was a woman who had once lived in this house, trapped by her own choices and regrets. "Your past doesn't have to define you," I said softly. "You can find peace." In that moment, I understood that the woman's anguish was tied to my own fears and insecurities. I had allowed her pain to seep into my life, and now it was time to break the cycle. With newfound resolve, I reached out to the mirror, feeling the cool glass beneath my fingertips. "I release you," I whispered. "You are free." The woman's expression shifted, transforming from despair to relief. She stepped closer, her face softening as she looked at me. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. In an instant, the room filled with light, and I felt a rush of energy surge through me. The mirror shattered, pieces of glass scattering across the floor, and the air around me crackled with electricity. As the light enveloped the room, I felt the weight of the woman's anguish lift from my shoulders. I watched as her figure dissipated into the light, finally free from the chains that had bound her for so long. The air grew still, the oppressive atmosphere replaced with a sense of calm. I stood in the now empty room, heart racing, knowing I had confronted the darkness and emerged victorious. I stepped out of the house, the red door now just a memory of the past. I felt lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The night air was cool against my skin, and I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. As I walked away from the house, I knew I had faced my fears and emerged stronger. The experience had changed me, reminding me that even in darkness, there is always the possibility of light. Months later, the house was demolished, the red door forever sealed in memory. I had moved on, but the lessons learned would stay with me forever. The haunting whispers faded, replaced by the sounds of life and laughter. In the end, I realized that the red door had been a catalyst for my transformation, a reminder that sometimes we must confront our fears to find true freedom. And in that realization, I found peace. Story 10. As I settled into my new apartment, I was filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Moving to a quieter neighborhood was a welcome change from the chaos of the city. My new home, a modest one-bedroom unit in an older building, offered a peaceful retreat. However, the ambiance was slightly unsettling. The halls were eerily silent, and the faint sound of creaking wood echoed through the walls. The first few days passed without incident. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my furniture, and gradually made the space my own. I was eager to meet my neighbors, but found the interactions scarce. Most of the tenants kept to themselves, going about their lives with little conversation. One evening, while taking out the trash, I noticed a door down the hall slightly ajar. Curious, I peeked inside. The apartment was dark, but I could make out the faint outline of furniture, all draped in sheets, as if abandoned. My curiosity piqued, but I quickly returned to my own apartment, pushing the eerie feeling aside. Days turned into weeks, and I became increasingly aware of the empty apartment. I often heard strange noises emanating from within, soft thuds, muffled voices, and the occasional sound of shuffling. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on settling into my new life. One afternoon, I decided to explore the neighborhood. As I wandered, I overheard snippets of conversation from the other residents. Whispers about a neighbor who had recently disappeared caught my attention. A woman in her late 20s, according to the gossip, she had vanished without a trace, leaving her apartment untouched. I returned home, my mind racing with questions. Who was she? Why had no one reported her missing? I felt a compulsion to investigate, convinced that the empty apartment down the hall held the answers. That night, I found myself staring at the door of the vacant apartment. My curiosity morphed into an obsession, and I knew I had to know more. I gathered my courage and knocked on the door, but no one answered. The following days, I attempted to gather more information from my neighbors, but they were tight-lipped, unwilling to discuss the missing woman. Their reluctance only fueled my desire to uncover the truth. I decided to take matters into my own hands. One night, I waited until late, when the building was quiet. I approached the door once more, this time with a sense of determination. The hallway was dimly lit, the shadows stretching ominously as I reached for the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as I had imagined, dusty, abandoned, and filled with an unsettling stillness. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and a layer of dust coated every surface. I felt an unsettling chill creep up my spine as I explored the small space, each creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. I noticed a few personal items scattered around: a framed photo on the mantel, a half-open book on the coffee table, and a pile of unopened mail. The photo caught my attention. It was a picture of the woman, her face radiant with a smile. She looked happy, full of life. As I examined the mail, I noticed that it was dated weeks ago, all addressed to the same name. Panic gripped me as I realized how long she had been gone. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the growing sense of dread. I had to find out what happened to her. Days passed, and my obsession with the missing neighbor grew. I returned to the empty apartment several times, each visit revealing more unsettling details. One night, I found a journal hidden beneath the couch. Its pages were filled with the woman's thoughts, detailing her life in the building, her dreams, and her growing sense of isolation. As I read her words, I felt a connection to her. She had been lonely, longing for companionship in a world that seemed indifferent. The final entries were disjointed and frantic, speaking of strange occurrences, whispers in the night, and a shadowy figure that haunted her dreams. "I can't escape," one entry read. "I feel like someone is watching me. I don't know how much longer I can take this." The words sent a shiver down my spine. What had happened to her? And why was I feeling the same sense of unease? One evening, as I prepared for bed, I heard the distinct sound of shuffling from the empty apartment. My heart raced as I peered through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness. The sounds continued, growing louder, and I felt an urge to investigate once more. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and approached the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I prepared to open it. I needed to know what was happening. But as I reached for the handle, a loud crash echoed from inside. Terrified, I stumbled back, the flashlight flickering as I turned to run. I bolted back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone in there, or was it just my imagination? The next day, I confronted a few neighbors in the building, desperately trying to gather more information. I was met with nervous glances and hurried conversations that abruptly stopped as I approached. Their avoidance only heightened my sense of paranoia. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Callahan, finally relented and told me the story of the missing woman. She was a sweet girl, but she had her demons, Mrs. Callahan said, her voice trembling. She claimed she was being watched, that someone was in her apartment when she wasn't home. "Did anyone believe her?" I asked, leaning closer. Mrs. Callahan shook her head. "We all thought she was just lonely, but then she disappeared. One day she was just gone." The weight of her words settled in my chest. I needed to know more. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I prepared for bed, I heard soft tapping on my window. I froze, my heart racing. I glanced outside, but saw nothing. The street was empty, the only sound the rustling leaves. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't be investigating. Leave it alone." My blood ran cold as I stared at the message. Who was sending this? I felt a chill creep up my spine, and a surge of fear coursed through me. I decided to stay awake, but sleep eventually overtook me, the unease lingering in the back of my mind. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a strange noise. It sounded like whispering, faint but persistent. I glanced at the clock. 3 a.m. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the walls, mingling with the creaks of the building. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped out of bed. The sounds seemed to be coming from the empty apartment. My heart raced as I approached the door, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. With shaking hands, I opened the door to the dark hallway. The whispers faded as I stepped into the shadows, the darkness swallowing me whole. I could feel the cold air wrapping around me, urging me to turn back, but I pressed on. As I reached the empty apartment, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, the air heavy with tension. I raised my flashlight, illuminating the space, and then I saw it, a shadow flitting across the wall, darting just out of reach. My heart raced as I followed it, each step echoing in the stillness. Suddenly, the whispering resumed, growing louder, more insistent. I felt the air grow thick around me, suffocating. "Help me," the voices pleaded, echoing the words from the journal. Panic surged through me as I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. I rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew more frantic, echoing in my mind, and I felt the temperature drop dramatically. In the midst of the chaos, I caught a glimpse of a figure in the corner of the room, a dark silhouette with hollow eyes staring back at me. I stumbled back, fear coursing through me. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "I'm her," the figure whispered, the voice echoing with anguish. "You have to help me." I realized with horror that this was the missing neighbor, the woman from the photo. "What happened to you?" I cried out, desperation lacing my voice. "I'm trapped," she said, her voice breaking. "I was drawn into this place and now I can't escape. You have to help me find the key." "Key?" I asked, panic rising. "What key?" "The key to the red door," she whispered, her form flickering like a candle flame. "It holds the answers." Suddenly, the door creaked open, and I rushed out, the figure fading into the shadows. I knew I had to find this red door. It was the only way to help her and uncover the truth. I returned to my apartment, frantically searching for clues. The journal offered no more information, but my mind raced with possibilities. Where was the red door? What did it signify? In the coming days, I continued my investigation, speaking with neighbors and searching the building for any signs of the red door. I was determined to uncover the mystery, my obsession driving me forward. Finally, one evening, I overheard two older residents discussing a long-abandoned part of the building, a storage area that had once been used for maintenance. I listened intently, piecing together the history of the place. That night, I gathered my courage and headed to the storage area. As I approached, I could feel a sense of dread wash over me. The door was heavy, and I hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, I found piles of old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten relics of the past. In the far corner, a faint light flickered. I approached cautiously, my heart racing as I spotted a door, the red door. The door was aged, its paint chipped and peeling. I felt a strange pull toward it, as if it held the answers I sought. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle, my heart pounding in my chest. As I turned the handle, the door creaked open, revealing darkness beyond. I stepped through, the air thick with tension. The room was small and dimly lit, but I could see the outline of the woman standing in the shadows. "You found it," she whispered, her voice echoing. "Now we can break the cycle." Together we stepped further into the room. The air felt electric, charged with a sense of urgency. "You have to confront the darkness," she urged. "Only then can I be free." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. The room began to tremble, shadows swirling around us. "I'm ready," I declared, facing the darkness that threatened to consume us. As I confronted the shadows, I felt the memories of fear, isolation, and despair wash over me. I had to break free from the chains that bound both of us. The shadows coiled around me, whispering doubts and fears. "You'll never escape," they hissed. "You're just like her." But I pushed back, confronting the darkness with all my strength. "I am not afraid. I will break this cycle." With each declaration, the shadows weakened, the light within me growing brighter. I felt the woman's presence beside me, her spirit growing stronger as I fought against the darkness. Finally, with a burst of energy, I shattered the darkness. A brilliant light enveloped the room, and I felt the woman's spirit lift from me. The oppressive weight lifted, and I stood in the radiant light, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "I'm free," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you." As the light faded, I found myself alone in the small room. The shadows dissipated. I stepped back through the red door, knowing that I had faced my fears and helped another soul find peace. The next morning, I awoke in my apartment, the sun streaming through the windows. The heaviness that had plagued me for weeks was gone. I felt lighter, free from the grip of fear and uncertainty. As I stepped outside, I noticed the neighborhood had changed. The air felt brighter, the residents more vibrant. I smiled, feeling a sense of connection to those around me. In the weeks that followed, I often thought of the woman and the lessons learned from her tragic story. I became more involved in the community, forging connections with my neighbors and building friendships. The memory of the disappearing neighbor lingered, a reminder of the importance of reaching out to others. In a world that often feels isolating, I realized the power of connection could break down walls and transform lives. And as I moved forward, I carried her spirit with me, a testament to the strength we all possess to overcome our fears and embrace the light.